Chapter 521. Ethan's words prompted Hermione to reflect deeply, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of shame. She had always harbored a sense of psychological superiority towards the old antiques of the wizarding world, priding herself on her adherence to the advanced ideas of Muggles. Upon closer examination, she realized this sense of superiority was essentially no different from the wizard's condescension towards Muggles. Indeed, she recognized her own arrogance. However, Ethan had more to say. Taking a deep breath, he continued, "In truth, the slavery contract is a measure of last resort. For these primitive races to join civilization, enduring pain and struggle is inevitable. Yet, this method can facilitate their faster integration into our wizarding world. Hagrid, much like you, is not fond of this approach, but he hasn't found a better solution." Ethan paused, his eyes alight with visions of the future. Once our group progresses, these giants, who have learned to respect order, will play a significant role in our industry. They can work as guards, bodyguards, and more. Imagine, creatures once deemed chaotic and dangerous, now contributing to security and order in our society. This transformation will be remarkable. As they walked through the camp, they observed a group of giants wielding large clubs. Ethan explained, "I encouraged them to replace their traditional clubs and giant axes with more civilized tools like finger tigers and batons. Although it's a small change, it's a crucial step towards their societal integration. One day, we'll overturn the public's negative stereotypes about them, allowing them to roam the streets freely, just like Hagrid, without facing discrimination." Listening to Ethan, Hermione's initial doubts began to fade. She understood that while Ethan was indeed exploiting these giants, his actions were also aimed at securing a better future for them. While she empathized with the giants' plight, she also recognized that sacrifices are sometimes necessary for the greater good. "Where's Hagrid?" Ethan suddenly inquired of a young wizard in a work uniform as they continued their walk. The staff member looked up, instantly recognizing Ethan as their esteemed leader. With a warm smile, he pointed in a direction not far off. "Over there, Mr. Ethan. Hagrid is likely with Grop now. He enjoys visiting his brother when he's free." Following the direction pointed out, Ethan saw the living area of the giants on the other side of the camp. Young giants were joyfully playing with a special, oversized rubber ball in the square, their laughter resonating through the air. Ethan crossed the square to one of the houses surrounding it. Inside, he found Hagrid, Grop, and the elder giant Moholt sitting together. Moholt was praising Hagrid. "Look, Hagrid, Grop can now use a fork. He's made great progress." Hearing this, a smile of satisfaction spread across Hagrid's face. He reached out his large hand, stood on tiptoe, and gently patted Grop's back, his voice filled with pride. "Well done, Grop. You're doing great." Ethan's gaze then fell on a broken pink umbrella lying quietly next to the huge stone pier where Grop was seated. Grop, now bald, wore a large leather hat, which gave him a somewhat comical appearance. He occasionally reached for Hagrid's umbrella, only for Hagrid to swiftly retrieve it each time. "Oh no, Grop, good boy, you can't touch this," Hagrid said, moving the umbrella behind him, his tone a mix of affection and mild reprimand. Grop watched as Hagrid moved the umbrella out of reach and let out a roar of mild dissatisfaction. At that moment, Moholt handed Grop a significantly larger than usual silver stainless steel fork, capturing his attention instantly. Ethan took the fork and began to eat the extra-large cake, no longer paying attention to Hagrid and the broken pink umbrella. After Ethan solved the mystery of the Chamber of Secrets, the fog of confusion that had enveloped the year gradually lifted. Hagrid's name was cleared, and he regained the right to use a wand. However, he still carried the umbrella that had concealed his wand and accompanied him through challenging times out of habit. "Hello, Hagrid, Grop, and Moholt," Ethan greeted them warmly as he approached. Hagrid looked up, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Oh, it's Ethan, and Hermione, you're here too. Come in quickly," he urged them into his hut. Inside, they saw a huge slate bed in the spacious bungalow, surrounded by thick animal skins and oversized furniture, creating a cozy and lively atmosphere. Moholt, upon seeing Ethan, stood up from the stone bench instantly, his face showing deep respect. With Ethan's help, Moholt had not only extended his life, but had also been fortunate enough to witness the giant race's gradual move toward civilization. Ethan's kindness had left a profound mark on his heart. Unlike the younger giants, Moholt, along with a group of wise elders, focused on essential yet often overlooked tasks like cooking, cleaning, and childcare. They contributed to the giant community's progress in their unique way. Ethan and Hermione sat next to him, engaging in a conversation about life in the reserve. Suddenly, Grop, with a slight stutter and irregular pronunciation, offered Hagrid a forkful of cake, almost touching his nose. Hagrid, unfazed, opened his mouth and took a big bite, his face beaming with satisfaction and relief. "Grop, good boy, you said it very well," he encouraged, touching Hermione and making her appreciate Ethan's efforts even more. After leaving Grop's cabin, Ethan and Hermione, in step with each other, left the giant's camp. They traversed winding paths, venturing deep into the Isle of Man Reserve. This reserve was a magical animal kingdom where every creature had a habitat specially tailored by dryads to suit their habits, creating small ecological paradises. However, the limited space on the Isle of Man and the diversity of magical creatures made the reserve feel somewhat crowded. After a thorough morning inspection of the reserve, the midday sun shone quietly on the Isle of Man. Ethan and Hermione entered the staff restaurant, choosing a table by the window to enjoy a sumptuous lunch made from ingredients produced within the reserve. After their meal, they retreated to a quiet lounge, where Ethan presented the revised Genius Club industrial renovation plan. Under Hermione's watchful eye, Ethan used his wand to reveal the words Alpha United Company on the cover of the plan. With a light tap of his wand, he duplicated the document, handing one copy to Hermione, who began to read it carefully. "Alpha United?" Hermione looked up, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Is this our new group name?" "Yes," Ethan confirmed, nodding. "Since we're preparing to integrate various industries for group operations, we need a unified name." The choice of Alpha United Company symbolized their commitment to combining arcane magic with their endeavors, representing a new chapter in their collective journey. Industrial advantages with arcane magic at the core not only symbolize our commitment to uniting the forces of all parties, but also our joint effort to create a broader future. Hermione nodded slowly as she listened to Ethan's explanation. She was well aware of Ethan's proficiency in arcane magic and his grand vision for the future, to use arcane magic to transform the entire magical world. From this perspective, the name is indeed both appropriate and powerful. Regarding the group operations of Alpha United Company, this is my revised, detailed plan. Ethan spoke slowly, his voice revealing confidence and determination. We will take Alpha United Company as the core and be fully responsible for the industrial management of the Genius Club. Today, we have our own TV station as a promotional platform, and we have also invested in the innovative industries of the Weasley twins. To ensure the steady development of the company, I plan to add several key departments for overall management. Hermione listened attentively to Ethan's explanation, gently flipping through the plan in her hand, and said, "In the plan, you mentioned the establishment of a security department, a technology research and development department, a market development department, a business consolidation department, and the strategic investment department as the 5 main departments." "Yes, Hermione," Ethan nodded. "These 5 departments not only assume important responsibilities, but also the personnel among them can cooperate and support each other during the operation process. This cross-department collaboration will be key to the efficient operation of our company." Chapter 522. Hermione continued to review the plans, muttering to herself. The security department is the company's paramilitary branch. Its primary role is to establish an armed force to ensure comprehensive security for the company. This includes the research and development of advanced destructive magical devices, providing military training, overseeing daily protection, and organizing and leading special operations teams. Members of this department must possess not only formidable magical abilities, but also strict discipline and outstanding adaptability. "It seems akin to the Aurors. It's a crucial department," Hermione noted, looking up with curiosity. "Who do you plan to appoint as the head of this department?" "I'm considering Cyrilla for this role," Ethan replied after a moment of thought. "She has shown commendable performance in her duties as an Auror at the Ministry of Magic, boasting extensive combat experience and exceptional leadership skills. Although she can't resign from her Auror position at the Ministry, we could enlist Tonks's assistance. Tonks could leverage her influence within the Ministry to assign Cirilla a long-term mission, allowing her to focus primarily on leading the security department during this period. Hermione fully agreed with Ethan's choice. Cirilla is indeed an excellent candidate. She's been finding her office role somewhat tedious lately, so this position would allow her to fully utilize her skills. As for Tonks, her role at the Ministry is too critical for her to step away. She'll have to manage her responsibilities as best as she can. Ethan smiled slightly, then moved on to discuss another department. The Technology, Research, and Development Department, as its name suggests, is the core unit responsible for the research, development, and production of potions. Their efforts are primarily based on the technologies provided by Professor Snape and myself. Through continuous experimentation and innovation, they aim to develop various practical potions. However, their objective extends beyond creating new products. They also seek the most cost-effective production methods to ensure these potions can be mass-produced and introduced to the market. He paused before continuing. The scope of the Technology R&D department isn't limited to potion research and development. They are also tasked with exploring how to incorporate Muggle genetic and breeding technologies to more effectively breed magical creatures. After all, magical beasts are a vital resource for our company. By developing breeds more suited for cultivation, we can not only boost production, but also ensure a steady supply of raw materials for the company's other ventures. The role of the Market Development Department is equally critical. They are charged with promoting our arcane magic and products, both domestically and internationally, helping more people understand and appreciate what we offer. Additionally, they are tasked with identifying new markets, providing ample opportunities for the company's growth. Outlets like Offa United TV and other promotional divisions play a significant role in this department, broadcasting our company's message and image through various channels. Ethan then introduced another department. Once the Market Development Department successfully opens new avenues, the responsibility shifts to the Business Consolidation Department. This department acts as the company's caretakers, ensuring the smooth operation of every factory, pharmaceutical field, and ranch. They not only oversee production processes, but also market the innovative magic potions and magical animal products developed by the Technology R&D department. He concluded, the responsibilities of the Business Strengthening Department extend well beyond these initial tasks. The company's portal transportation network operates like the lifeblood of our organization, ensuring the swift and secure delivery of products to every necessary corner. Additionally, the Business Consolidation Department plays a crucial role in setting prices for the company's products and materials, alongside the long-term maintenance of facilities and handling other essential tasks. Their efforts are crucial for the seamless operation and growth of the company's ventures. Hermione, showing keen interest, asked, "What about the Strategic Investment Department? What is their role?" Ethan responded with a smile. The Strategic Investment Department focuses on monetizing the company's non-core industries. Unlike the Business Consolidation Department, which manages our main operations, this department seeks out potential investment opportunities in these non-core areas. By strategically investing technology and capital, they aim to convert these opportunities into substantial benefits for the company. Moreover, should the company decide to shift any non-core industry to a core one, the Strategic Investment Department collaborates with the Business Consolidation Department to ensure a smooth transition and maintain a stable business structure. Ethan then highlighted the synergy between the departments. The collaboration among departments is clear yet closely knit. They function like interconnected gears, driving the company forward. He illustrated this with the example of the Giants management. Initially, the Technology Research and Development Department, through the Isle of Man Conservation Area, took charge of the Giants' welfare. However, as their needs grow, the Business Consolidation Department will soon oversee the large-scale production of the Stone Skin Potion, initially developed by the Technology Department. Eventually, after receiving military training and equipment from the Department of Safety and Security, the Giants will become a formidable force for the Austrian-French alliance. Hermione was impressed. Such a structured and efficient system not only unifies the company's efforts, but also directs them towards a common goal, enhancing coordination and fostering development. With the industrial group's operational blueprint laid out, it was time to turn these ideas into reality. Leaving the Isle of Man, they teleported back to the tower to draft letters to Jaina and others, outlining the next steps. There was much to be accomplished. After hours of writing, Ethan set his quill down, massaging his wrist from the prolonged effort. Looking out the window, he noticed the sunset giving way to the night. The golden afterglow faded as a bright moon began to emerge, signaling a full moon night. Hours later, Hogsmeade Village found itself under a blanket of dark clouds, obscuring the moonlight and casting a shadow over the village. A gentle breeze rustled the branches, adding to the night's eerie ambiance. Rustling sounds filled the air on a dark night as a group of people hurriedly made their way through the village, following a narrow trail. "Ms. Umbridge," Onyxia's voice pierced the darkness, tinged with suspicion. "Are you truly certain that he is currently in that secret passage and has transformed?" Although she had learned everything through Ethan, she still feigned ignorance of Lupin's identity and Umbridge's conspiracy in front of everyone. Umbridge's voice, still unnervingly sweet and slightly discomforting, carried a decisive determination this time. "Of course, Director Presto. After a meticulous half-month investigation, I have fully confirmed his identity. Moreover, today I personally followed him into the secret passage. My in-depth investigation revealed shocking facts." She paused, as if recalling significant details. It was Severus Snape, the head of Slytherin, who prepared the Wolfsbane potion for him, clearly under Dumbledore's instructions. The teachers and the headmaster of Hogwarts are all complicit. Facing them alone is beyond me, which is why I've enlisted your help and the werewolf capture team's assistance. I've also requested Minister Fudge to personally visit the academy to confront Dumbledore. Onyxia nodded slightly, her admiration for Umbridge's cunning and decisiveness evident. She noticed Umbridge had foregone hay, her usual pungent perfume, a deliberate choice to avoid alerting werewolves with the scent and revealing their location, a move befitting Fudge's right hand. Onyxia cautioned Umbridge. "However, I must inform you, the werewolf capture project team was in disarray before my leadership, and the legal framework is riddled with gaps. Thus, even if Remus Lupin is an unregistered werewolf with the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, as long as he consumes Wolfsbane potion regularly and has no history of aggression, he is unlikely to face severe punishment under current laws." Umbridge's expression darkened momentarily in the shadows, but she quickly composed herself. "My aim isn't to punish," she declared, her voice laden with a veneer of righteousness, "but to protect the innocent children. Despite Dumbledore's authority to hire staff, his decision to secretly employ a werewolf as a professor without informing the school board poses a significant risk to student safety. I cannot stand idly by. I must act to ensure their protection. Given our shared objective to safeguard Hogwarts students, it's only logical for us to thoroughly verify the information you've provided," Onyxia stated, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat that the night wind had slightly dislodged. She spoke with conviction and authority. The group soon reached Honeyduke's shop, its lights shining brightly and beautifully in the night. A dozen Ministry of Magic staff members gathered outside. Ambrosio Frum, the shop's owner, tall, thin, and bald, emerged in a state of alarm. "Excuse me, what's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. Before he could say more, one of Onyxia's ministry employees quickly showed his ID and pulled Mr. Frum aside to explain the situation. Mr. Frum's face registered surprise and unease, yet he cooperated with the officials willingly. Chapter 523. When the shop owner stepped aside, Umbridge could hardly contain her eagerness to reach the front of the shop. Her plump face twisted into a smile that appeared innocent but was tinged with cunning and pride. "Director Presto, this is the place," she announced, her voice laden with anticipation. Onyxia discreetly slipped her hands into her pockets, making a concerted effort not to glance at the shelves brimming with galleons, Secor, and the cash register at Nats. Guided by Umbridge, they navigated through the store's aisles to the warehouse at the back. With a practiced ease, Umbridge opened a trapdoor, unveiling the entrance to a dark tunnel from which the faint howling of wolves could be heard, sending shivers down one's spine. "It seems our target is inside," Onyxia remarked, nodding towards the secret passage. The Ministry of Magic employees around her caught on immediately. "Dancing lights!" One Ministry employee whispered, and with a flick of his wand, a ball of light burst forth, illuminating the dark tunnel with its bright glow. The werewolf capture team, highly trained and equipped with nets and other gear specifically designed for subduing werewolves, moved with the agility of cheetahs, taking the lead into the tunnel. Umbridge, her face alight with excitement, followed them inside, determined to witness Lupin's capture firsthand. Onyxia remained in the Honeyduke store, accompanied by Auror guards. Their task was to secure the entrance and exit of the secret passage, preventing any chance of escape. With Onyxia's formidable abilities, capturing a werewolf single-handedly would be effortless if she entered the tunnel. However, she chose not to, for several reasons. As high-ranking officials in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, it was important to allow their subordinates opportunities to shine. Moreover, she wished to maintain a distance from Dumbledore to prevent her dragon identity from being uncovered by the venerable wizard. Although the likelihood was slim, avoiding unnecessary complications was preferable. Eventually, a team member emerged to report the werewolf's capture. The torn sleeves of his robe indicated a fierce struggle had taken place inside the tunnel. Onyxia gave a slight nod, satisfied with the success of their plan. More than half an hour later, the quiet of Hogwarts was shattered. A bustling crowd surged into the square outside the castle. Among them, Harry and Ron, driven by a mix of curiosity and apprehension, made their way to the front. The sight that greeted them left them momentarily stunned. A werewolf stood on its hind legs, its gaping maw revealing razor-sharp fangs that gleamed menacingly under the light. Harry's eyes widened as fear surged within him, rendering him immobile. It wasn't until a scream pierced the night that he snapped out of his daze. Looking up, he saw the moon emerging from behind a cloud, its bright light cascading down and illuminating the square. The werewolf, stimulated by the moonlight, tilted its head back and let out a deafening howl that resonated louder and more ominously than any before, echoing through the night. The sudden, terrifying sound sent the gathered young wizards into a panic, prompting them to retreat. A brief silence fell over the square in the wake of the howl, only to be broken by whispers. The students huddled together, discussing the fearsome werewolf and speculating about its identity in hushed, horrified tones. At that moment, Harry suddenly tugged on Ron's sleeve and whispered in a trembling voice, "That's Professor Lupin." Ron's mouth fell open in shock as he glanced around the scene. Ministers of Magic, Fudge and Umbridge, stood in conspicuous positions, their faces adorned with triumphant smiles, aggressively demanding explanations from Dumbledore. Dumbledore, standing silently to the side, had deep eyes that seemed to harbor endless worries. How can this be? The young wizards around them were also whispering, disbelief evident on their faces. How can Professor Lupin be a werewolf? Umbridge's sharp voice cut through the night air, accusing Dumbledore mercilessly. With Dumbledore's silent demeanor, they felt compelled to believe the Pink Toad's words. Suddenly, the werewolf let out a shrill howl that pierced the night sky, sending shivers down everyone's spine. Then, screams erupted, primarily from the young witches of Hogwarts, who huddled together in fear. The young wizards in the square, frightened by the continuous screams, turned pale, some even beginning to tremble. It was difficult for them to reconcile the image of the gentle and tolerant Professor Lupin with the manic and crazed werewolf before them. Yet, the undeniable truth was right in front of them. The next day, at noon, the sun shone through the window onto the dining table in the tower, where Ethan and Hermione sat together to eat. On the TV, the host was broadcasting the noon news. The Ministry of Magic's Werewolf Capture Project team took action at Hogwarts yesterday and captured an unregistered, out-of-control werewolf. The host's tone was slow, with a rare hint of shock, and after verification, we were surprised to find that the true identity of this werewolf was actually the professor of defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts, Remus Lupin. The screen switched to Fleur, a female reporter in a white professional suit, standing on the grounds of Hogwarts with the werewolf bound tightly by ropes in the background. The werewolf was tall, with thick black hair, and its exposed fangs gleamed coldly in the sunlight. Fleur appeared excited, struggling to calm her emotions. "I am currently at Hogwarts, and as you can see, this werewolf has been firmly controlled by the Ministry of Magic," Fleur said, her gaze shifting to the werewolf behind her. "We are still gathering more details about this incident." The screen switched again. Principal Dumbledore stood in front of the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the field before landing on Umbridge. Unintimidated by her, he cleared his throat, his voice amplified by magic, and announced, "Friends and children, please don't panic. I implore you to grant me, this old man, some time to speak and explain everything." Dumbledore took a deep breath and continued, "Yes, the werewolf before you is the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor I personally invited, Remus Lupin." Umbridge's words had only been half believed by the young wizards before, but now, with Dumbledore's admission of Lupin's identity as a werewolf, his words caused an uproar among the crowd. Yet Dumbledore did not falter. He went on, "Indeed, I personally invited him to teach at Hogwarts. I have always been aware of his condition, and it is precisely because of my knowledge about Remus that I fully trust he will not harm the students. Remus takes the Wolfsbane potion, prepared for him by Professor Snape, on time every month. Thus, even on a full moon night, he does not fully transform into a werewolf, but becomes a docile, ordinary wolf." Dumbledore's tone was sincere, reflecting his infinite trust in Lupin. Before this incident, Remus had always remained awake and restrained, never once harming anyone. However, last week, despite taking the potion as usual, he did not expect. The possibility of such an event occurring tonight was clearly a deliberate act of framing, with someone tampering with the potion. "I urge you to remain calm and maintain respect for Professor Lupin, allowing him the opportunity to prove his innocence," was the plea made to the crowd. At that moment, Professor Snape emerged from the throng, his expression so dark it appeared as though it could drip with gloom. Gazing at the restrained werewolf, a flicker of complex emotion passed through his eyes, bringing with it a flood of memories from a nearly fatal incident during his own school days. This recollection ignited a surge of anger in Snape, prompting him to step forward and assert loudly, "Dumbledore, while I, Snape, may not be a saint, I have not tampered with his potion. If you doubt my integrity, feel free to have someone prepare a Wolfsbane potion for him. Severus, do not let your anger cloud your judgment. You know that's not my intention." Dumbledore responded with a frown, attempting to calm Snape. "I'm not questioning your actions, but we are faced with a complex situation. We need to work together calmly to uncover the truth." At this juncture, a saccharine and artificial voice interrupted the exchange between the two. Ms. Umbridge, with a twist of her waist, stepped forward, her smile dripping with insincerity. "Principal Dumbledore, please allow me to offer a small suggestion. Since this unfortunate werewolf," she was met with a stern glare from Dumbledore, causing her to falter momentarily before quickly amending her statement. "Ahem. Since Mr. Remus Lupin has been the victim of careless tampering with his medication, how can you, Principal Dumbledore, guarantee that such an incident won't recur?" Surveying the crowd and noticing some young wizards nodding in agreement, Umbridge's confidence swelled, and she continued with even greater arrogance. "We were fortunate this time that the tragedy was averted before any harm could be done, thanks to the timely intervention of our Ministry of Magic. But what about next time? If the Ministry fails to act swiftly, the consequences could be catastrophic. Principal Dumbledore, the decisions you make out of personal affection for Mr. Lupin could potentially endanger the children within the castle." Upon hearing Umbridge's remarks, whispers began to spread among the young wizards gathered around. Many found her argument surprisingly persuasive. Despite their usual disdain for Umbridge, viewing her as an intrusive and irritating figure, they couldn't help but acknowledge the validity of her points at this moment. Chapter 524. "Oh my God, I spent so long with a living werewolf," a young wizard exclaimed, his face a mix of horror and disbelief. If he really loses control, wouldn't we all be at risk of infection? My life would be completely ruined. How could the school allow a werewolf to stay among us? They seem completely indifferent to our safety, taking it for granted, another young wizard said angrily. Have they ever considered our well-being? My father is a school director. I must inform him about this immediately so he can take action against the school. However, Professor Lupin is usually so kind to us, and his classes are quite engaging. A young witch interjected hesitantly. It's hard for me to believe he could be a werewolf. What do you know? Werewolves are evil. They have no souls, her friend retorted fiercely. Professor Lupin being nice might just be a way to lower our guard. These werewolves should be sent to Azkaban. After the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures administered potions and spells, the towering werewolf, Professor Lupin, began to gradually regain his sanity. His eyes, once clouded by wildness, slowly cleared. Tied firmly to the ground, he could only sit quietly, his head bowed, as if trying to hide from the world's gaze. From a distance, his once formidable body now trembled slightly, appearing small and humble, like a beast caught by a hunter, awaiting its fate. Around him, some young wizards angrily rebuked him, expressing their shock and anger at being deceived. Their harsh words pierced deeply into Lupin's heart. Even those students who had previously enjoyed a good relationship with Professor Lupin refrained from defending him, standing silently aside. Their eyes were cold and distant, as if they were looking at a monster, a dangerous being that could harm them at any moment. This shift in perception broke Lupin's heart. He would have preferred to remain lost in the wilderness forever, rather than face this harsh reality. The night's events added a new layer of trauma to his already tormented life. Harry Potter struggled to make his way through the crowd to reach Professor Lupin, intending to free him. However, as he approached, he was stopped by members of the werewolf capture team. "You can't go there. He's still dangerous," a team member stated firmly. Harry struggled against their hold, feeling Professor Lupin's sadness and humiliation. "No, you're wrong. Professor Lupin wouldn't hurt anyone. He wouldn't," he shouted, hoping to stir the conscience of the onlookers. Among the young wizards, some, like Hufflepuff's Hannah Abbott, found the scene unbearable. "Maybe what Harry said is true?" she whispered to those nearby. "Look at Professor Lupin. He's regained his senses. He's always been so gentle." However, her words were quickly dismissed by Seamus Finnegan. "Don't believe Harry Potter's words. Have you forgotten the Daily Prophet's articles? He's been trying to spread lies about the mysterious man's return to attract attention. Like my mother said, not even Dumbledore can be trusted now." Seamus's words, fueled by an earlier argument with Harry and others at the start of the school year, seemed to him like undeniable proof. Harry felt a pang of bitterness hearing these words. He looked around, his pleading gaze meeting those of his fellow Gryffindors. "Professor Lupin had countless opportunities to harm me. I've been alone with him many times, and he never did anything. The same goes for you, right? He is innocent." However, Harry's plea was met with silence from his peers. Influenced by Seamus's skepticism, they began to doubt both Harry and Professor Lupin. Only Neville Longbottom seemed on the verge of speaking up, his expression conflicted. Ethan glanced at the werewolf, his body trembling slightly as he took a few steps back, unwilling to meet Harry's gaze directly. In that moment, the werewolf, who had been looking down, suddenly lifted his head. His red eyes, devoid of any human emotion, fixed on Harry. He nodded, then shook his head, a gesture that sent a ripple of fear through the young wizards present, prompting them to retreat further. However, Harry understood Professor Lupin's message. While grateful for Harry's defense, he was also cautioning him against speaking out further on his behalf. "Professor Lupin's light is white." Luna suddenly emerged from the crowd, standing beside the bound Professor Lupin. Her voice was clear and firm. "He is different from the madman with a black light. He is innocent." Her words initially confused Harry, but he quickly grasped her meaning. Luna had always seen the world through her own unique lens, and now she was using her perspective to voice her support for Professor Lupin. A warmth surged in Harry's heart, touched that someone had stood up for Lupin. Soon after, several of Harry's friends made their way to the front. "I believe in Luna, and I believe in Professor Lupin, Ginny declared, stepping beside Luna and taking her hand. Ron, who had been hesitant after witnessing Professor Lupin's earlier uncontrollable state, finally found his courage and approached Harry alongside his sister. Professor Lupin is innocent, he stated, though his voice was dry. Attempting to mimic Ginny's gesture, he reached for Harry's hand, only for Harry to shake him off, glaring. "Are you mad? Now's not the time for this," Harry seemed to say with his eyes. The scene shifted as the camera of the arcane eye turned towards the employees of the werewolf capture team. Their torn clothes and scratches painted a picture of their recent ordeal, eliciting sympathy from Harry and his friends despite Lupin's feeble attempts at explanation. The broadcast returned to Fleur Delacour, the reporter, now standing outside Hogwarts in the light of dawn, interviewing a group of irate parents. "We strongly protest against Professor Dumbledore's irresponsible behavior," one parent exclaimed, waving a magic wand passionately. "If my child's safety cannot be guaranteed, I'd rather transfer him to another school. Hogwarts has lost our trust." Another parent lamented, "I once believed Hogwarts was the safest place on Earth, but I was mistaken. It's a shame that such horrors could happen here too." Public opinion swiftly turned against Dumbledore. Previously, he might have stood toe-to-toe with Minister of Magic Fudge, leveraging his esteemed reputation. However, the balance could no longer be maintained. His decision to hire werewolves as professors, placing students in potential danger, had alienated even those parents who had once supported or been neutral towards him. Faced with mounting pressure and the threat of more severe accusations from the Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore was forced to compromise with Fudge. He conceded his oversight in hiring Professor Lupin and agreed to let the ministry rectify the situation at Hogwarts. Dumbledore's concession was a victory for Fudge, who was overjoyed. He lavished praise on Umbridge for her role in the affair, promoting and rewarding her almost immediately. Chapter 5 and 25. Hermione returned to Hogwarts on Monday morning, already informed about Lupin's situation over the weekend. Upon entering the Gryffindor common room, she noticed an unusual atmosphere. A group of young wizards was gathered around the fireplace, intently watching the news on a television, a recent addition by Ethan to each house's lounge, which had quickly become popular among the students. They had adapted their morning routine to include watching TV news while having breakfast, a habit Harry and others had also adopted. Hermione hurried over to join them, and the sight on the screen made her gasp. She had anticipated the Ministry of Magic extending its influence over Hogwarts, but the rapid development of current events took her by surprise. The screen showed Fleur Delacour as the host, with a large image of Dolores Umbridge in the background. Umbridge's smile, seemingly blinking at them, was filled with pride and provocation. "This is yesterday's major news," Fleur's voice filled the lounge. In a move to promote educational reform, the Ministry of Magic has issued Education Decree No. 23, appointing Dolores Umbridge as Hogwarts' first High Inquisitor. "Umbridge, High Inquisitor?" Harry muttered, his frown deepening as a piece of bread fell from his hand. No one responded. Last night, in an emergency meeting, the ministry passed the new decree, granting them an unprecedented level of control over Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Fleur continued. This follows closely on the heels of Education Decree No. 22, introduced by Minister Cornelius Fudge on August 30th, which allows the ministry to recommend candidates for teaching positions if the current headmaster fails to provide a suitable candidate. The broadcast then cut to Fleur interviewing Percy Weasley in an office setting, introducing him as the Assistant Minister of Magic. The choice of Percy for the interview, aimed at increasing his visibility, was unknown to the viewers. "Mr. Weasley, as a ministry employee, what is your take on this new legislation?" Fleur inquired. Percy, with a barely concealed pride, cleared his throat before responding. "The minister has grown increasingly concerned about the direction Hogwarts is heading, based on feedback from worried parents. The introduction of Education Decree No. 22 was a preemptive measure." Hermione, watching from the side, had an epiphany. "So that's why Ethan warned us not to expect much from the Defense Against the Dark Arts class this term," she realized. Dumbledore had appointed Lupin to the position to prevent Umbridge from taking advantage of Education Decree No. 22 and gaining a foothold at Hogwarts. Unfortunately, Umbridge got what she wanted in the end, Harry said, his brow furrowed in confusion. But what does this have to do with the senior investigator? Wait, Harry, the news isn't over yet. You'll find out after reading it, Hermione replied, her expression serious. After the teacher known as the werewolf professor was expelled from Hogwarts, the screen briefly cut back to Fleur, who was intently reading the manuscript in her hands. Ms. Dolores Umbridge will take over the Defense Against the Dark Arts class at Hogwarts. She has vowed to bring breakthrough changes to the course and promised to provide timely feedback to the Minister of Magic on the true situation at Hogwarts. Recently, the Ministry of Magic passed Education Order No. 23, and this temporary action has officially come into effect. At the same time, she will be given a brand new position, Hogwarts Senior Investigator. These new measures by the Ministry of Magic have been enthusiastically supported by parents of Hogwarts students who hope to see a more standardized and efficient Hogwarts. Then the scene cut back to the interview scene in the Ministry of Magic office. This is an exciting new step in the minister's attempt to rein in the declining standards of education at Hogwarts, said Percy enthusiastically. The Ombudsman will have the authority to review her fellow faculty members to ensure that they are all meeting established educational standards. Professor Umbridge has been awarded this important position in addition to her teaching duties, and we are delighted to say that she has embraced the challenge. Immediately afterwards, the scene switched again, this time displaying a magnificent mansion. A blonde, blue-eyed, well-dressed, middle-aged man was sitting elegantly on the sofa for an interview. Beside him, the caption read, Lucius Malfoy, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry board member. I finally feel more at ease knowing that Dumbledore will be judged fairly and objectively, Lucius said slowly. Many of us parents who care about the vital interests of our children have been worried about Dumbledore's erratic decisions in recent years. I am very relieved to know that the Ministry of Magic is paying close attention to this situation and taking practical and effective measures to improve the educational environment at Hogwarts. The screen returned to the live broadcast room again, and Fleur continued. Those weird decisions undoubtedly include the appointment of some controversial faculty members. These included the employment of werewolf Remus Lupin, half-giant Rubeus Hagrid, and a former Auror known as Mad-Eye Moody, who was disguised by others. Of course, there are also rumors that Albus Dumbledore, the old man who once served as the president of the International Federation of Magicians and the chief wizard of the Wizengamot, is no longer qualified to manage Hogwarts. This school has a heavy responsibility. Immediately afterwards, the screen began to quickly switch to interviews with different people. In the hall of the Ministry of Magic, a Ministry of Magic employee who was randomly interviewed expressed his views. I believe that any inquisitor is the first step in ensuring that Hogwarts has a headmaster that we can all trust. We need to ensure that school leadership truly has the best interests of students at heart. However, at the Wizengamot Liaison Office, two elders, Griselda Markbans and Tibellus Ogden, resolutely resigned in protest against the appointment of investigators for Hogwarts. Mrs. Markbans angrily said, Hogwarts is a school, not an outpost of Cornelius Fudge's office. This is an attempt to further discredit Albus Dumbledore and his disgusting behavior. We cannot tolerate this kind of interference from the Ministry of Magic in schools. Finally, the screen returned to the live broadcast room again, and Fleur concluded, the passage of this decree was very smooth, but it also represents that the Ministry of Magic's control over Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry has tightened. Wizardry has reached an unprecedented level. Let's wait and see how Hogwarts will evolve in the future. With that, the news segment concluded. Harry, trembling with rage, turned off the TV. Now we finally understand how Umbridge was forced upon us, Ron exclaimed, his voice thick with fury. Fudge pushed her onto us with that educational decree, and now she's been given the authority to inspect other teachers. It's utterly disgraceful. Harry nodded, his eyes alight with shared anger. It's beyond disgraceful. How could they do this to Hogwarts? How could they disrespect Dumbledore in such a manner? Hermione stood quietly to the side, her gaze still fixed on the now dark TV screen, her mind swirling with turmoil. She knew Ethan was involved in this situation. Over the weekend, Ethan had visited to inspect the protected area and had held a conference on industrial grouping. She had been occupied with these tasks until today and hadn't returned to school. In her heart, she believed Ethan hadn't intended to simply stand by and let this unfold. However, she also understood that Ethan had exerted his utmost effort in this matter. Even before this, on the train, he had tried to convince Lupin not to return to school, but to no avail. Lupin had insisted on taking up the Defense Against the Dark Arts post, fully aware of the case to fulfill Dumbledore's plans, and Ethan was under no obligation to solve Dumbledore's problems. Hermione felt a deep sense of helplessness. The news segment had featured the anchor, Fleur, Chapter 526, A New Approach to Defense Against the Dark Arts. On Tuesday afternoon, the fourth-year students at Hogwarts made their way into the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. This session marked their first lesson with Professor Umbridge. Rumors about the new professor had circulated since Saturday night, yet the students had little concrete information about her. A palpable tension filled the air as they entered, the silence a testament to their uncertainty regarding Professor Umbridge's stance on discipline and her teaching methodology. "Good afternoon, classmates," Professor Umbridge greeted, her voice high-pitched and somewhat unnatural. A few students responded with a lackluster, "Good afternoon," their enthusiasm evidently dampened. "Tsk-tsk," Professor Umbridge expressed her dissatisfaction, shaking her head. "That won't do, will it? I expect more politeness. When I say good afternoon, classmates, you should respond with, good afternoon, Professor Umbridge. Let's try that again, shall we?" Her tone was reminiscent of one used for instructing young children. This time, the class complied, echoing in unison, "Good afternoon, Professor Umbridge." "That's better," she said, nodding in approval. "Not too difficult, right? Now, please put away your wands and take out your quills and parchment." The students shared glances of resignation. They had learned from experience that being instructed to put away their wands usually preceded a less engaging lesson. Nonetheless, they obliged, stowing their wands and preparing their writing materials. Professor Umbridge retrieved a notably short wand from her handbag and approached the blackboard. With a sharp flick, 2 lines of text appeared. Defense Against the Dark Arts, Back to Basics. "Dear students, your education in this subject has been sporadic and unsystematic, hasn't it?" she began, her fingers interlocked and resting on her chest. With a revolving door of teachers, many of whom haven't adhered to the Ministry of Magic's approved curriculum, it's no wonder the quality of instruction has been so variable. She paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "Consider the instructors you've had. Death Eaters, dark wizards, liars, werewolves. It's unfortunate, but it means you're not at the level you should be for your OWLs." Her critique struck a chord, leaving the students silent and unable to argue. They had indeed been taught by a series of questionable characters, resulting in a disjointed understanding of the subject. "Your previous teachers have left much to be desired," she continued. "Professor Quirrell was a stuttering mess. Lockhart in your first year was nothing more than a charlatan interested in selling books. Lupin, despite his seriousness, turned out to be a werewolf, and Moody treated you more like Auror trainees, focusing on the unforgivable curses without proper examination preparation. And to top it off, he was an imposter." The students couldn't help but wonder if Professor Umbridge, despite her peculiar demeanor, might offer a refreshing change. Observing their reactions, Umbridge seemed pleased that her message had resonated. "You'll be relieved to know that we're going to address these issues," she said sweetly. "This year, we'll be following a meticulously planned, theory-based Defense Against the Dark Arts curriculum approved by the Ministry of Magic. This will ensure you grasp the true essence of defending against the dark arts. Please copy down the following information." With that, she tapped the blackboard lightly, the sound crisp in the attentive silence of the classroom. Echoed in the quiet classroom, the 2 lines of words vanished, replaced by the course objectives on the blackboard. They were clearly listed. 1. Gain an in-depth understanding of the cornerstone and core of magical defense. 2. Accurately identify situations and conditions for the legal use of magical defense. 3. Evaluate and improve the practical application ability of magical defense. Following Professor Umbridge's instructions, the class room filled with the rustle of quills on parchment as students diligently copied down the objectives. A few minutes later, once everyone had noted the objectives, Professor Umbridge inquired in a whisper, "Does every student already have Wilbert Slinkard's The Theory of Magical Defense?" A murmur of affirmation rose from the class, but it seemed to fall short of Professor Umbridge's expectations. "I wish our communication could be clearer," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "When I ask a question, I expect the answer to be yes, Professor Umbridge, or no, Professor Umbridge. So let's try this again. Does every student already have Wilbert Slinkard's The Theory of Magical Defense?" "Yes, Professor Umbridge," the class responded in unison, louder and more orderly this time. "Very good." Professor Umbridge nodded, satisfied. "Now, please turn your book to page 5 and read Chapter 1, Basic Principles of Defense. While reading, please remain quiet and refrain from talking." The students exchanged looks of disbelief, a wave of disappointment washing over them. They had anticipated a Defense Against the Dark Arts class filled with excitement and practical combat, not a mundane reading session. This turn of events dampened the spirits of many young wizards who had harbored high hopes for the class. Is this really Defense Against the Dark Arts? A young wizard muttered under his breath, his voice laced with dissatisfaction. "I thought we'd learn some powerful magic, but this is what we get." Another echoed, equally disappointed. Whispers and murmurs of discontent spread among the students, their expectations for Professor Umbridge dwindling. "This teaching method is even worse than Lockhart's," one student complained. "At least Lockhart had interesting performances to watch." "Yeah, this isn't a Defense Against the Dark Arts class. It's more like Days at Hogwarts," others agreed. However, as Professor Umbridge's gaze swept over the students, her eyes sharp and intimidating, the room fell silent. The students quickly lowered their heads, focusing on their books as the sound of reading filled the air. Professor Umbridge, satisfied, took her seat behind the podium, her gaze never leaving the students. The content of the book was dry, nearly as tedious as Professor Binns's history lectures. The students read listlessly, their minds wandering elsewhere, yet not everyone was disengaged. Luna Lovegood, for instance, had turned to the 5th page of The Theory of Magical Defense, but wasn't reading. Instead, she twirled her quill absent-mindedly, a look of dissatisfaction in her eyes. From the moment Umbridge had taken over Professor Lupin's position, Luna had harbored a strong dislike for her. Ginny, Luna's good friend, was even more overt in her disdain. She hadn't even opened her book and stared directly at Professor Umbridge, her hand raised high in silent protest. However, Professor Umbridge seemed oblivious to Ginny's gesture, deliberately looking in the opposite direction, ignoring her completely. The students began to notice an other among them, their gazes shifting back and forth between Ginny and Umbridge, intrigued by the silent standoff unfolding before them. As the lesson dragged on, the chapter they were supposed to be studying seemed to stretch into eternity. One by one, students lost interest in the text, their attention captured instead by Ginny. Her determined eyes and raised hands symbolized a quiet rebellion on their behalf. Gradually, over half the class was watching her. Their focus shifted from the dull pages of the textbook to Ginny's silent challenge to Professor Umbridge. Eventually, Umbridge could no longer ignore the shift in the room's dynamics. She turned her head slowly, her droopy eyes landing on Ginny with feigned surprise. "Dear, do you have any questions about this chapter?" she asked, as though noticing Ginny for the first time. Ginny, momentarily taken aback, shook her head. "No, it's not about this chapter," she replied, her brow furrowing slightly. "It's about this book." Umbridge's eyes narrowed instantly. "Huh? This is a textbook approved by the Ministry of Magic. Do you doubt the Ministry?" she retorted, her tone becoming critical, a hallmark of Ministry of Magic bureaucrats. It was as if she had long been prepared for such inquiries, and she launched into a defensive tirade. "If you question the purpose of this course, let me remind you, you are not an education expert trained by the Ministry. Our curriculum has been designed by wizards far older and wiser than you. You'll learn defensive spells in a manner that is safe and without risk." Ginny had barely spoken, yet Umbridge had already positioned herself for battle, preemptively addressing and dismissing any potential criticisms. This airtight defense was characteristic of a seasoned politician from the Ministry of Magic. Ginny was dubbed a good fellow for her silent yet bold stance. Before she could articulate her concerns, Umbridge had already launched a preemptive strike, effectively silencing any doubts. This image of Ginny, standing up to authority in her own unique way, resonated with the students. Update 4/3, additional update 105-115. Please consider showing your support with custom orders, flowers, monthly votes, comments, and rewards. Your votes are especially appreciated and crucial to me as the author. Your support is very important. Chapter 527. However, Ginny smiled slightly, unfazed by Professor Umbridge's intimidating presence. She was secretly relieved that she had consulted Ethan in advance before deciding to confront Umbridge. Ethan was indeed the person she admired most, effortlessly identifying a series of loopholes. The loophole Ethan provided was precisely what Umbridge couldn't defend against. Thus, Ginny decided to treat Umbridge with the same tactics she used on others. "No, Professor, I have no objections to the Ministry of Magic. However, while reading this book, I found some serious inaccuracies. It made me wonder if the author might be an anti-ministry element, or even worse, a Death Eater," Ginny stated confidently. She had learned from Ethan that the best way to counter those who hastily label others was to turn the tables on them. Ethan was adept at handling such political maneuvers. Professor Umbridge was taken aback by Ginny's boldness. Her droopy eyes scrutinized Ginny, searching for any sign of weakness, but Ginny didn't give her the opportunity. Holding up the book, she read aloud. On page 25, it states, "Once extreme defensive magic is used, the wizard should subject himself to severe physical punishment. Ascetic practices are beneficial for strengthening resolve and eliminating distractions." Professor Umbridge frowned. "What's wrong with that?" she asked. "There's a significant issue," Ginny replied, her voice strong and assertive. "This contradicts the first principle of Adebe Wafflin's Basic Laws of Magic, which states that tampering with the essence of life, the core of one's being, at will, prepares one to face the most severe and perilous consequences. Asceticism is explicitly forbidden." The surrounding students were astonished, viewing Ginny in a new light. Adebe Wafflin? Basic Laws of Magic? Wasn't this something they had learned in their first year? Could it be that these complex theories, which seemed purely academic, were actually applicable in real situations? No one had truly taken the time to understand and apply these theories, had they? Why was Ginny using them to challenge the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook? Did she truly grasp these concepts? Suddenly, Ginny seemed incredibly formidable. But Ginny didn't stop there. "And on page 72, she continued, flipping through the pages swiftly. The students eagerly followed along, curious about what issue she would highlight next. Here it claims that muggles both covet and fear magic, suggesting they can become wizards through learning spells and wand movements, Ginny said, her voice tinged with outrage. In 1672, a magical treatise published by Mysteries affirmed that wizards are born, not made. This view is also endorsed by the International Confederation of Wizards. She slammed the table forcefully, the loud bang startling everyone. Can you believe the author dared to write such things? Ginny's eyes blazed as she fixed her gaze on Professor Umbridge, bombarding her with questions. Is Wilbert Slinka challenging the authority of the International Confederation of Wizards? Is he trying to worsen the already fragile relationship between wizards and muggles? What was his purpose in making these statements? Who is encouraging him? What are his true intentions? Did he have the Ministry of Magic's approval to make these claims? Did the ministry tacitly condone his actions? Who supports him in writing these words? What is he trying to undermine, and what does he intend to destroy? Each question hit like a bombshell, leaving Professor Umbridge reeling. She stood frozen, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion and then to panic. Ginny's relentless questioning shattered her composure, plunging her into turmoil. Completely at a loss for words, Ginny couldn't help but smile proudly at Professor Umbridge's reaction. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly. Hats, word prisons, selective hearing. Who wasn't familiar with these tactics? Umbridge thought she could use these methods against her, but she was gravely mistaken. Ginny might not be able to outmaneuver seasoned politicians, but she had Ethan on her side. Ethan had been through numerous battles and was well-versed in handling such politicians. The latest textbook, Magical Defense Theory, was hastily compiled under the secret directive of Minister Fudge. Fudge's agenda was transparent. He aimed to meddle with Hogwarts' teaching autonomy, subtly diminish the students' magical prowess, and quash any potential signs of a Hogwarts rebellion. The textbook was rife with Fudge's dogmatic views. For instance, he vehemently recommended a passive approach to conflict and discouraged the use of any offensive spells. Essentially, he wished for wizards to be as meek as sheep, relinquishing their right to wield magic in disputes. The criteria for what constituted offensive magic were laughably arbitrary, with Fudge setting a bizarre and impractical standard that anything with kinetic energy exceeding 1.8 joules was deemed a weapon. How were wizards expected to defend themselves in actual danger? Fudge appeared indifferent. According to him, the magical world was a utopia of peace and prosperity under his leadership, while foreign wizards faced calamity. The dangers he mentioned seemed irrelevant to this idyllic magical realm. The Ministry of Magic's actions, including the biased stance of magical defense theory, mirrored those of their distant Muggle counterparts. How could such a textbook offer any objective or accurate insights? Even the most venerable potions textbooks contained errors so glaring that even average wizards could identify and suggest improvements. Wilbert Slinkhard, the author of this so-called textbook, was a third-rate magic writer, inferior even to Lockhart. It was no surprise that the book, hastily produced over a summer vacation, was riddled with mistakes. More concerning was that Slinkhard's work was not only full of errors, but also laced with personal biases and secrets. These biases, like hidden undercurrents, threatened to erode the reader's minds. However, for a wizard like Ethan, with his deep scholarly achievements and extensive magical knowledge, identifying these flaws was straightforward. It was akin to an undergraduate thesis defense, where the student believes their work to be of merit, only for it to be seen as an affront by the evaluating professors. Given the textbook's numerous issues, Ethan found ample material to critique. Although he had agreed with Fudge, on behalf of the Erudite Society, to not interfere at Hogwarts, this didn't mean he would allow Umbridge free rein. When Ginny sought his assistance, he quickly devised a plan. His willingness to cooperate with Umbridge did not equate to liking the pink toad. If Umbridge enjoyed imposing labels on others, they would counter with magic. Thus, in Umbridge's first class, Ginny spent merely 20 minutes using a series of clever prompts and suggestions to lead everyone to draw their own conclusions. Ginny's words were laced with disdain for Wilbert Slinka, hinting at a deeper conspiracy aimed at undermining the Ministry of Magic. She expressed her concerns without directly implicating Fudge, mindful that the wizarding community still held the ministry in high regard. Why would the minister betray us? She pondered, though she knew better than to voice such a direct accusation. Enough is enough. Umbridge, unable to tolerate Ginny's relentless probing, snapped in an attempt to silence her. Yet, Ginny was undeterred. Professor, are you curious about Dumbledore's whereabouts today? Or where Headmaster Leto has gone? She asked, skillfully shifting the conversation and catching Umbridge off guard. The absence of Dumbledore that morning had already unsettled Umbridge, and Ginny's questions only heightened her unease. Where did he go? Umbridge demanded, visibly shaken by the implication of her question. The Wizengamot has united to impeach Minister Fudge, Ginny revealed, her tone grave. The impeachment proceedings began today, but since you were teaching, it's understandable that you, aren't aware. Umbridge felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her body went rigid, her hands and feet turned ice-cold, and her lips quivered as fear filled her eyes. The impeachment of a Minister of Magic by the Wizengamot was an exceedingly rare event in British wizarding history. The prospect of Fudge being successfully impeached and forced to resign was a significant blow. For Umbridge, this meant the loss of her most powerful ally, along with any hopes for future promotions and salary increases. Desperate for more information to secure her position in the midst of this political upheaval, Umbridge found herself outmaneuvered by Ginny. Like a cunning fox, Ginny entangled her with astute inquiries, leaving Umbridge floundering for answers. The image of a sly fox perfectly captured Ginny's adeptness at navigating the conversation, leaving Umbridge at a loss. Chapter 528. Professor, let's return to the textbook. Ginny, feigning seriousness, reopened the textbook that Umbridge treasured so dearly. As a professor, did you really not notice the numerous errors? Or are you intentionally misleading us? Umbridge's face contorted further in displeasure. She opened her mouth to respond, but found herself at a loss for words. That's right, Professor. Ginny suddenly shifted the topic. Could you share with everyone your OUL score in Defense Against the Dark Arts? As a professor, you must have excelled in this subject, right? Ginny's expression was one of genuine curiosity, though her question utterly devastated Umbridge. Umbridge, overwhelmed, covered her face and burst into tears. Her crying was shrill and uncomfortable, reminiscent of a teacher overwhelmed by unruly students on her first day. Such behavior might have garnered sympathy if exhibited by a different teacher, but coming from Umbridge, it only evoked revulsion and disdain. Her tears failed to elicit any sympathy. Instead, they diminished her stature even further in the eyes of the students. That's it for this lesson. Let's stop here, Umbridge managed between sobs, declaring the class dismissed before hastily exiting the room, leaving behind chaos and a room full of astonished students. Ginny watched Umbridge's retreat with a smirk, surprised at how quickly the Ministry of Magic employee had crumbled. Most would seek an escape or feign unconsciousness, but Umbridge simply fled in tears, a sight that was both revealing and unexpected. The classroom erupted into cheers, celebrating Ginny's bold confrontation. The students waved their wands and applauded enthusiastically, recognizing her courage and defiance. By dinner, word of Ginny's feat had spread throughout Hogwarts. Students gathered at the long dining tables, buzzing with excitement over the day's events. Umbridge's dismissal of Professor Lupin had pleased some, but her popularity had plummeted, especially among those who had endured her Defense Against the Dark Arts classes. Her strict and unimaginative teaching methods had alienated many, leading to a newfound appreciation for Professor Lupin's engaging and insightful lessons. Harry, inspired by Ginny's bravery, resolved to stand up to Umbridge, especially for her unjust treatment of Professor Lupin. He planned to confront her openly, unafraid to speak Voldemort's name and share the truth of that fateful night. Harry's resolve was strengthened by the sight of Ginny, who had faced Umbridge without consequence. Her courage gave him hope and determination to fight against injustice and oppression. As Harry observed Ginny, now animatedly chatting at the Ravenclaw table, he felt a twinge of jealousy. Yet, he recognized the importance of their shared goal, to challenge Umbridge and defend the values they held dear. It was a moment of relief and joy, not just for the young wizards, but also for the professors. The absence of Professor Umbridge at the dinner party seemed to lift everyone's spirits, particularly Professor Flitwick, who found his appetite significantly improved. No longer subdued, he even indulged in 2 extra bowls of rice. Professor McGonagall, in a rare gesture, awarded Ginny additional points, praising her courage and encouraging her to continue her commendable efforts. Meanwhile, Minister Fudge faced a potential crisis of impeachment. However, the threat did not emanate from Dumbledore, nor was it as daunting as an impeachment by the entire International Confederation of Wizards. Instead, Xilda Marchbane and Ogden, 2 senior members of the Wizengamot, initiated impeachment proceedings against Minister Fudge, even at the cost of their own resignations. Although such a move was unlikely to succeed easily, after all, history had seen figures survive similar challenges, it was clear that Minister Fudge was under significant pressure. In response, Minister Fudge gave an interview with Offa France United Television, visibly agitated and defiant. "This is ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. Our attempt at impeachment has caused great anger. It's appalling for them to proceed with this. If Marchbane and Ogden persist with their impeachment efforts, I believe it will pose a grave danger to our nation and have dire consequences." At that time, Ethan was enjoying dinner with Zhang Chu, Ginny, and Luna. The dining table was laden with a variety of delicious dishes, and their conversation blended into the background noise of the bustling auditorium. A junior girl approached them, her steps uncertain, and a piece of parchment clutched tightly in her hands. "Mr. Green, Professor Umbridge asked me to give this to you," she whispered, barely audible above the din. Ethan smiled warmly and accepted the parchment. "Thank you," he said, causing the girl's cheeks to blush slightly. She nodded quickly and hurried away. "It seems our friend is as popular as ever," Luna remarked with a mischievous glint in her eye. "The real issue is Umbridge inviting Ethan for tea," Ginny interjected, glaring at Luna. "I've always felt Umbridge had ulterior motives," Jiang Chu added, concern evident in her voice as she looked at Ethan. "What do you think she wants?" "Could it be because of me?" Ginny asked, looking at Ethan apologetically. "Was I too reckless today, causing trouble for you, Ethan? Is that really important?" Ethan reassured her, gently holding Ginny's hand. "Don't worry, Ginny. Umbridge is just a power-hungry bureaucrat. She can't do anything to us." "Pink Toad," they exclaimed in unison, sharing a laugh over their shared disdain for Umbridge. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Ethan knocked on the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts office. "Come in, Mr. Green," Umbridge's sharp, saccharine voice called from inside. Ethan entered the office and found Umbridge sitting behind her desk, her gaze seemingly warm, but with an underlying coldness. "Please take a seat, Mr. Green," she gestured to the chair opposite her. After surveying the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, Ethan sat down. Umbridge, in her high-pitched voice, asked, "What would you like to drink? Black tea, milk, pumpkin juice, or butterbeer?" "I prefer milk tea," Ethan replied with a slight smile. With a wave of his wand, a cup of steaming milk tea appeared in his hand. He took a sip, looking satisfied, indifferent to Umbridge's disapproving gaze. Umbridge's smile faltered at this display of independence. She had hoped to build a rapport with Ethan by offering him a drink, but it was clear that Ethan was not easily swayed. Her preferences aside, she hadn't anticipated such blatant disrespect from him. "Okay, Professor, what do you want from me?" Ethan set down his teacup and inquired, his gaze fixed on Umbridge. Taking a deep breath to maintain her composure, Umbridge responded, "I believe we've come to an understanding, haven't we?" She locked eyes with Ethan, attempting to convey a sense of peace. "There's no need for conflict between us." Despite her urge to physically lash out at the composed figure before her, Umbridge restrained herself. She couldn't even entertain the thought. Instead, she mentally repeated words of praise for Ethan, hoping to calm her frustration as a substitute for a clemency. However, Ethan merely offered her a light glance. "Sorry, Professor, I'm not quite sure what you're implying." He elegantly lifted his milk tea for another sip, his expression one of genuine confusion. "Defense Against the Dark Arts class questions," Umbridge pressed on, aware that Ethan was feigning ignorance. She forced a smile, keeping her tone as pleasant as possible. "I believed I had fulfilled your request. Utilizing the deputy headmistress's privileges, I exempted you from attending classes and didn't interfere with the members of the DA, despite their numbers. Yet, it seems some situations are beyond my control now." Ethan carefully placed his milk tea down, dabbing his mouth with a napkin before addressing Umbridge. "That has nothing to do with me." "Do you truly believe that?" Umbridge's voice took on a sharp edge, disbelief lowering her tone. She had observed Ethan and a particular girl together on multiple occasions, their closeness suggesting a significant relationship. Yet Ethan was now distancing himself from any connection to the girl. "I thought your relationship with that girl was noteworthy," Umbridge continued, her curiosity piqued. Ethan sighed, a trace of weariness in his gaze. "In that regard, Minister Fudge and I share similar predicaments." The girl in question was Ginny, a detail that added layers to the complexity of their discussion. Chapter 529, Troubled, and Secretary Fudge? Umbridge was visibly perplexed. "What does this have to do with Minister Fudge? I don't understand what you're implying, Mr. Green." Ethan Green met her confusion with an indifferent glance. "We all have some subordinates who act beyond our control, don't we? After all, I'm merely an ordinary wizard. I can't possibly dictate the thoughts of everyone under my command. And considering they are all young, it's natural for youth to be rebellious." "Who are you calling an old woman?" Umbridge bristled at Ethan's words, her anger flaring. It was clear to her now, Ethan was suggesting that Fudge couldn't keep his subordinates in line, implying she was one of those uncontrollable elements for sending Dementors after Harry. The mention of youth being rebellious was a jab at her age, insinuating she was old and powerless. The urge to retaliate physically against Ethan's provocations was strong. Taking a deep breath, Umbridge tried to suppress her mounting fury. She felt like a toad on the verge of exploding, swelling with indignation at Ethan's remarks. Yet she knew better than to confront him directly, aware of his superior strength. After a prolonged silence, she managed a flattering tone. "Mr. Green, I apologize. If Miss Weasley's behavior persists, I might find it challenging to uphold our agreement. Secretary Fudge would not condone such an imbalanced partnership. Please ensure she is controlled effectively." Ethan shook his head. "No, Professor Umbridge, you've misunderstood. If someone attacks you, you're naturally entitled to defend yourself within the rules. I wouldn't dream of interfering with that." He then stood, approaching Umbridge with deliberate steps. Stopping close to her, he leaned in, whispering ominously, "But remember, Professor Umbridge, your retaliation must always adhere to the rules. Should I find you stepping out of line, that will be a different matter entirely." Umbridge felt a cold shiver run down her spine at his words, nodding obediently and agreeing without hesitation. As Ethan turned to leave, he paused, offering a piece of unsolicited advice. "Be wary of curses, Professor." Umbridge, puzzled, inquired, "Curses?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Given that the curse left by Voldemort is among the most perilous, underestimating it would be a grave mistake." His gaze deepened as he continued, "This is a lesson learned through the unfortunate experiences of many professors." Seeing Umbridge's confusion persist, Ethan elaborated with an example. "Consider Professor Lupin's ordeal. His werewolf condition was exposed, leading to his dismissal, all because he underestimated Voldemort's curse. He managed to teach for a semester and left on his own terms, avoiding further misfortune. However, his attempt to teach again last semester proved disastrous." Umbridge's expression soured, her denial swift. No, Lupin's transformation wasn't due to any curse. In her haste to refute the curse, Umbridge inadvertently confessed, "It was I who tampered with his wolfsbane potion, causing his transformation during the full moon. I orchestrated his capture. It was all my doing." Unbeknownst to her, Ethan had discreetly recorded the entire confession with the mystical eye. A sly smile played on his lips as he emphasized, "Indeed, Professor Umbridge, you orchestrated those events. But remember, all actions have consequences." Ethan sighed softly, and without saying anything else, turned and left the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, leaving Umbridge alone to confront the chaos and fear in her heart. The door slammed shut behind him, and Umbridge's fake smile finally crumbled. She roared angrily, sweeping the books, stationery, and documents off her desk onto the ground. "Damn curse! Damn mudblood!" In the surrounding corridors, the loud noise and curses startled the students. They poked their heads out curiously, only to see that the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts office was tightly closed, and from inside came the sound of Umbridge roaring angrily, and things breaking. The students exchanged glances, wondering what was happening inside, but they all wisely chose to steer clear of the trouble. Ginny's turmoil temporarily subsided, but the next day, a new wave of unrest arose in the 5th grade Defense Against the Dark Arts class. The anger in Harry's heart could no longer be contained, and he decided to follow Ginny's lead and challenge Umbridge. In class, he openly questioned the usefulness of Umbridge's lessons for self-protection. "Under the leadership of Minister Fudge, the wizarding world is safe," Professor Umbridge stated in a terrifyingly intimate voice. "Who do you imagine would attack children like you?" "You say the wizarding world is safe and we don't need to protect ourselves," Harry sneered. "Then, Professor, what should we do if Voldemort returns?" His words caused an uproar in the classroom. Ron gasped. Lavender Brown let out a low scream, and Neville leaned over and fell off the bench. However, Professor Umbridge did not show any signs of fear. She just stared at Harry with a vicious look of satisfaction on her face. 10 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Potter." The classroom fell silent. Everyone was either staring at Umbridge or Harry. "Okay, let me clarify a few things." Professor Umbridge stood up, leaning forward, pressing her palms on the podium. Someone told you that a certain dark wizard has risen from the dead. He's not dead, Harry said angrily, but yes, he's back. Mr. Potter, you have already lost 10 points for your house, but don't make things worse, Professor Umbridge said in one breath, without looking at Harry. As I just said, someone told you that a certain dark wizard is out again. This is nonsense. This is not nonsense, Harry announced loudly. And in the cemetery of Little Hangleton, Voldemort was almost defeated by Professor Dumbledore and others. This is absolutely true. Silence, Mr. Potter, Professor Umbridge said proudly. Tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock in my office. I say again, this is nonsense. The Ministry of Magic ensures that you are in no danger from any dark wizards. If you still have doubts, please come to me after class. If anyone is trying to scare you with lies about dark wizards coming back from the dead, I'd be happy to hear it. I'm always ready to help you. At this time, Umbridge was secretly chuckling. Since she became the vice principal, professor of defense against the dark arts, and senior investigator, she had long wanted to cause some trouble to assert her authority. Ginny's defiance was an opportunity, but the girl was so cautious that Umbridge found no way to start. She cleverly used the loopholes in the rules Umbridge had promulgated to attack her, leaving Umbridge unable to retaliate. Otherwise, even if Ethan had intervened, she would have announced the punishment on the spot and then sought Ethan's favor afterward. The cooperative relationship between Ethan and Fudge alone could not quell her desire to demonstrate her power. Dominating Hogwarts had become an even more tantalizing prospect now that Harry had inadvertently played into her hands. The key figure had literally arrived at her doorstep, presenting a golden opportunity. She was determined to seize this chance to make an example out of him, to instill fear in the other young wizards and witches at Hogwarts. That evening, at the long table in the auditorium, Ethan listened intently to Hermione's thorough account of the day's events in class. He couldn't help but cradle his forehead in his hand and sigh deeply. Harry's impulsive actions were a source of constant frustration for him. It seemed Harry had yet to learn from his past mistakes, continuing to act without thinking. The reason Ginny had avoided punishment was not solely because of Ethan's protection. More crucially, she had cleverly navigated Umbridge's rules without directly opposing her. However, Harry failed to grasp this subtlety. He had adopted only Ginny's flair for defiance, yet lacked the sophistication to effectively challenge Umbridge. His naive attempt to force Umbridge to acknowledge Voldemort's return was not only futile, but also invited more trouble upon himself. As expected, his rashness soon resulted in severe consequences, and he found himself isolated in a solitary room. Ethan's reflection on the situation highlighted the stark contrast between Harry's brashness and Ginny's cunning. It was clear that navigating Umbridge's tyrannical rule required more than just bravado. It demanded a strategic approach, one that Harry had unfortunately overlooked. Chapter 530. In the few days following Umbridge's rise to power, the students quickly came to understand her hypocritical, self-righteous, unreasonable, and manipulative nature. Her oppressive demeanor left everyone feeling suffocated. All the prefects who had interactions with Umbridge found her disagreeable. A bold prefect even leaked details of their conversation with Umbridge, revealing her attempts to use the prefects as spies on the Hogwarts students. The Deputy Minister of Magic seemed to confuse Hogwarts with the Ministry of Magic, engaging in political intrigue within the school walls. She aimed to undermine the students' trust in their prefects, hoping to turn them into her informants. As the news spread, it ignited a wave of excitement across the school. The prefects, resenting Umbridge deeply, chose not to be ostracized by the students and began sharing what they knew. Soon, negative rumors about Umbridge spread like wildfire. The most thrilling news for the students was Umbridge's confrontation with Ethan, which left her so infuriated that she wrecked her office. Reports of the sounds of destruction and her curses leaked from the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, sparking lively discussions among the students. "Did you hear about Vice Principal Umbridge making a fool of herself in front of Ethan?" one student asked. "Of course! I even heard the commotion and her cursing from the office," another replied, laughing. "What a delight! That old woman finally met her match." While the students didn't dare confront Umbridge as boldly as Ethan did, they found immense satisfaction in seeing the usually pompous vice principal humbled. However, the specifics of how Ethan managed to infuriate Umbridge remained a mystery. Ethan's confidence and past achievements meant he didn't need to prove his worth through conventional means. Moreover, his close relationship with Jaina Proudmoore, the Deputy Minister of Magic and Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was well known. Rumors even suggested they shared a close personal relationship. Given Umbridge's inability to intimidate him, Ethan saw no reason to acknowledge her. Ethan's disregard for the vice principal was evident. He was frequently absent from Hogwarts. Remarkably, he was exempted from all classes except Defense Against the Dark Arts, a privilege unheard of in Hogwarts history, yet Umbridge was powerless to intervene. Soon, another piece of astonishing news emerged. Umbridge had excused Ethan from attending all classes. This unprecedented favoritism sparked envy among the students. Even more surprising was the special treatment afforded to the Erudition Society, led by Ethan. They were permitted to use a separate classroom for practical exercises during Defense Against the Dark Arts classes, a significant acknowledgement of the society's status and capabilities, which made other students envious. The Erudition Society quickly became one of the most sought-after societies in Hogwarts, with numerous students applying for membership. However, to everyone's surprise, Hermione rejected all these applications. With her characteristic calm and wisdom, she explained, "Due to the ongoing threat from Umbridge, the Erudition Society has decided to postpone the recruitment of new members." Yet, she offered an alternative. "We are providing an opportunity for interested young wizards to join our paid cram school. Next semester, based on their performance and progress, we will give priority to recruiting new members. Young wizards with outstanding performance." Although this decision left the young wizards feeling slightly disappointed, they understood Hermione's considerations. As a result, in the days that followed, the cram school of the Learned Society became one of the most sought-after courses at Hogwarts, earning a reputation as a hot commodity. Of course, facing the troublesome Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, the little wizard's counterattack was gradually taking shape. That evening, in the Great Hall of Hogwarts, teachers and students gathered for dinner as usual. Umbridge had taken the second seat on the teacher's bench, second only to Dumbledore. In front of her was a piece of fragrant steak and a bowl of steaming mushroom soup. However, just as she cut off a piece of steak and eagerly took a bite, a strange sensation overcame her. She felt a warm current surging in her nasal cavity. Instinctively, she reached out and touched it, only to discover bright red blood stains on her fingers. Umbridge's heart tightened, and she quickly lowered her head to find that her nosebleeds had covered the once appetizing steak. This scene not only stunned Umbridge, but also caught the attention of those around her. Dumbledore, sitting next to her, immediately noticed something was amiss. He frowned and asked with concern, "Professor Umbridge, are you all right?" Umbridge hurriedly took a handkerchief from her pocket and covered her nose, trying to stem the flow of blood. Before she could respond to Dumbledore, the other professors at the teacher's table cast concerned or curious glances her way. Even the students, who had been chatting quietly, quickly noticed the commotion at the teacher's table. At the Gryffindor table, brothers Fred and George exchanged a look, a glimmer of pride in their eyes. Fred deliberately raised his voice, feigning surprise. "Oh, it seems like something's happened?" George caught on and continued, feigning concern. "Yeah. Why did our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor suddenly get a nosebleed? Could it be?" He paused, looking around as if waiting for everyone to join in with their guesses. Could it be that the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's curse has taken effect? Fred seized the opportunity to stir the pot. "She's really unlucky. This happened to her on her first day at school." His words elicited a burst of snickers, quickly drowned out by the surrounding noise. Meanwhile, Umbridge's situation did not improve. She was horrified to find that the nosebleeds seemed to be getting worse, and her handkerchief was soaked with bright red blood. She looked around in panic, seemingly in search of help. Professor McGonagall, witnessing the scene, couldn't help but frown. Although she was no fan of Umbridge, out of basic decency, she suggested, Professor Umbridge, perhaps you should visit the school hospital. Madame Poppy Pomfrey might be able to assist you. Umbridge nodded awkwardly and hurried out of the Great Hall, her departure causing a stir. However, the rumor that the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor had been cursed spread like wildfire among the students, becoming a new source of amusement. How long do you think it will take for Madame Pomfrey to cure her? Zhang Chu asked Ethan, covering his mouth to stifle his laughter. Ethan shrugged and replied nonchalantly, "Probably. It won't take long." In fact, it took about a quarter of an hour. After Ethan had finished 2 pieces of food, Umbridge reappeared at the entrance of the Great Hall. Her face was slightly pale, but her steps were steady as she sat back down. But the relief was short-lived. Just as Umbridge picked up her knife and fork, ready to enjoy her meal, she felt a familiar warm current. Blood surged out of her nose once more, leaving her stunned. The knife and fork in her hands clattered crisply onto the table. A murmur spread through the auditorium as all eyes turned to Umbridge. Standing up in embarrassment, she found her handkerchief stained red with blood again. Under the watchful gaze of the crowd, Umbridge hurriedly left the auditorium, making her way to the school hospital. This time, Umbridge hadn't touched any food on the table. She harbored suspicions that someone might have tampered with the food. However, considering that everyone had chosen their own food, it seemed unlikely that she was being targeted specifically. Unbeknownst to Umbridge, the real culprit was Peeves. The mischievous poltergeist had tampered with her utensils. Nosebleeds being relatively common, everyone assumed Umbridge was simply in poor health. The idea that someone was deliberately targeting her never crossed their minds. As Umbridge left the auditorium in embarrassment for the second time and headed to the school hospital, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The professors couldn't hide the gleeful smiles in their eyes, while the students whispered among themselves, curious about the cause of her distress. "Why did she have a nosebleed again?" one student whispered. "It seems very serious," another added. "Do you think the curse on the Defense Against the Dark Arts position has taken effect?" a third speculated. "It's possible. After all, this started when she first arrived," another student mused. When Umbridge reappeared at the auditorium's entrance, her face was paler, and she looked visibly haggard. She sat down cautiously, eyeing the food and even the tableware as if they were laden with hidden dangers. "Are you really not going to have some? The treacle tart is excellent," Dumbledore offered, noticing Umbridge had barely eaten since the beginning. He suggested this with a smile. Umbridge managed a stiff smile and shook her head. "No, I'd better not eat anything for now," she replied. Her mood was decidedly sour. Watching everyone else enjoy their meal while she went hungry felt like a form of cruel torture. Chapter 31. Umbridge's Embarrassment and the Twins' Plan. When Umbridge left with the other professors at the end of dinner, the auditorium erupted into commotion once again. Students were abuzz, discussing Umbridge's mortifying exit. "Did you see her? That pink cardigan is an eyesore," a student remarked, barely containing his laughter. "And that voice of hers, so high-pitched and grating, it's unbearable," another student added. "Did you notice she had a nosebleed? Maybe she encountered something she shouldn't have," a third student speculated, adding a layer of mystery. "Perhaps the curse of the Defense Against the Dark Arts position is at play here," some wondered aloud. "She does resemble a toad," a student exclaimed, inciting laughter from the crowd. Amidst the ongoing chatter about Umbridge's unfortunate incident, the Weasley twins approached Ethan in a quiet manner. Once they reached a secluded corridor, Ethan remarked, "It was indeed you two behind this." After casting a spell to ensure their conversation remained private, startling the peacefully sleeping Iwu behind him, Ethan listened as Fred outlined their plan. "We intend to use Umbridge as a living advertisement for our joke products. By testing them on her, we're sure to draw more attention and boost our sales," Fred explained with a hint of mischief. George chimed in, "Her disgraced image will be our best billboard. Just the thought of her in that state will bring joy to everyone." Ethan, not feeling the slightest sympathy for Umbridge, found himself amused by the outcome. "That's a brilliant idea," he agreed. Despite the pranks, he knew they wouldn't be enough to drive Umbridge away from Dumbledore's side. However, George expressed some concern. Do you think the professors might suspect something? Nosebleeds are a bit unusual, after all. Ethan pondered for a moment before responding. It's hard to say. The professors might find clues if they look closely, but a nosebleed could easily be dismissed as an accident. Besides, they're not fond of Umbridge, so they're unlikely to investigate further. He added with a cunning smile, and even if they don't find anything now, your plan ensures more surprises for Umbridge. It'll be obvious to anyone that something's amiss. Changing the subject, Fred mentioned their previous discussion about using illusion projections for pranks. Do you have a prototype? He asked eagerly. Ethan produced 2 intricately designed stickers and a parchment filled with detailed instructions. Place these stickers where you want the illusion to occur, wait 10 minutes, and the projection will activate, complete with sound, light, and even simulated smells and touches, Ethan explained. He assured them that the stickers would leave no trace, burning away after activation. Curious about the content of these illusions, George inquired about the scenarios they would create. Ethan's response was tinged with mystery. One features a menacing troll roaring in the darkness, while the other depicts Sadako emerging from a television, her face obscured by long hair, inching closer. He assured them that these were mere illusions, harmless to those who encountered them. The manufacturing details were meticulously noted on the parchment. Amazing, Ethan, Fred exclaimed, impressed by the detailed writing and illustrations on the parchment, ready to bring their new prank ideas to life. On it, Ethan immediately praised, "Such a wonderful invention may seem like a mere trick to you, but to us, it represents a significant leap forward for the world. We will never disappoint you with technical support," George added excitedly. They exchanged looks and instantly hatched a plan. Fred suggested, "Tonight presents a perfect opportunity. Let's approach Peeves and test the effectiveness of this gadget." George nodded in agreement. "Exactly. It's opportune, especially since Umbridge was already spooked today. We can amplify our efforts and let her witness the capabilities of these illusion projectors. Just ensure my involvement remains a secret yet." Ethan chuckled, issuing a warning. "I'd rather not attract that old woman's attention." With that, he waved and departed. Fred and George were eager to proceed. They ventured to an abandoned classroom on the 8th floor to locate Peeves. Amidst the eerie silence, a peculiar giggle echoed as Peeves materialized through the wall. "Peeves, you're a master at causing chaos, and we have a favor to ask," George began, addressing the floating figure. "Umbridge, that pink toad, harbors grand schemes against Hogwarts. Should she succeed and become the new headmistress, life here would become unbearable for both of us, and she'd likely attempt to banish you." Fred continued, "We're hoping you can keep her preoccupied, ensuring she's too busy to meddle in our affairs. Naturally, your antics must remain covert, and importantly, avoid harming the innocent." George added with a sly smile, "Succeed, and that pink toad will dance to your tune. We promise not to complain, no matter the extent of your mischief." Fred then presented Peeves with a small wooden box and a sticker. "Consider this a token of our appreciation. The box contains your semester's rations, and the sticker, well, it might just give Umbridge a surprise tonight." Peeves, visibly intrigued by the new toy, caught the items with a gleam in his eye. George seized the moment to suggest, "You could stealthily place this sticker on Umbridge's bedside table while she sleeps. The ensuing chaos will be a spectacle." Fred cautioned, "Just make sure she doesn't catch you, and don't let anyone know these came from us. Otherwise, you'll miss out on future fun." "Use our inventions to make that pink toad suffer, ha!" George exclaimed, his excitement palpable. Peeves, with a mischievous laugh, tipped his hat in thanks and vanished through the wall. Peeves, unlike the ethereal ghosts, is a sprite capable of navigating both reality and illusion, making him particularly elusive and challenging to manage. "Do you think Peeves will stick to the plan?" George asked Fred, a hint of doubt in his voice. "It's unlikely, but Hogwarts is about to become a lot more interesting," Fred responded, shaking his head. "Peeves lives for pranks. Our role is merely to redirect his focus towards Umbridge, providing him with the tools for his mischief. I'm certain Umbridge will have her hands full." George's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "I can't wait to see the surprise Peeves has in store for Umbridge tonight." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Fred cautioned. If we're caught, the professors won't go easy on us. In the dead of night, the corridors bathed in moonlight were eerily silent. Peeves hummed a tune as he navigated the halls, making his way to Umbridge's dormitory. Unbound by anyone's commands, Peeves acted solely on his whims, his penchant for mischief, undirected and unpredictable. Ethan, true to his nature, displayed an unusual interest in teasing Umbridge. Perhaps he thought, if he could derive more pleasure from aggravating that woman, then why not seize the opportunity? At that moment, Umbridge had just finished savoring the dinner delivered by a house elf and had drifted into a sweet dream. Peeves, seizing the opportunity, quietly sneaked into the room and placed the sticker the twins had given him on Umbridge's bedside table. After positioning it, he stepped back to admire his masterpiece with a sense of satisfaction before stealthily retreating. Not long after, the drawer of the bedside table began emitting strange noises, signaling the start of another chaotic night. Chapter 532. Umbridge, who had been deeply asleep, was jolted awake by a sudden commotion in her room. In a panic, she reached under her pillow, grasping her wand tightly. With a whispered incantation, Lumos, she illuminated the tip of her wand. As Umbridge lifted her head, her eyes widened in terror. Standing before her bed was a colossal creature, a troll towering 4 or 5 meters tall. To Umbridge, it seemed like a mountain looming over her, its presence oppressive. The foul stench emanating from the troll was nauseating. She watched in horror as the troll raised its massive club, ready to strike her. In that moment, Umbridge felt as if she were staring death in the face. With a piercing scream, Umbridge tumbled out of bed, flung the door open, and dashed into the corridor, her screams trailing behind her as if to dispel the terror clutching her heart. The troll's roar and the thunderous crash of its club against the floor melded into a nightmarish symphony. Amidst this chaos, Peeves, the poltergeist, burst into laughter. Materializing in Umbridge's room, he found immense joy in the spectacle of her frantic escape. This prank, he realized, was one of his most enjoyable yet. Chuckling, Peeves vanished into the corridor in a swirl of smoke. The first to investigate the commotion was Mr. Filch, the caretaker, lantern in hand. The flickering light cast eerie shadows as he approached Umbridge's door, nearly colliding with the distraught professor. "Professor, what happened?" Filch inquired, steadying himself. A troll appeared in my room." Umbridge stammered, her face ghostly pale, eyes wide with fear. "It almost killed me." Filch scanned the quiet corridor, puzzled. "A troll? Here? That's impossible. How could a troll enter the castle unnoticed?" Before he could voice his doubts, Professor McGonagall rounded the corner. Dressed in pajamas, her hair neatly tied back, she exuded a calm authority despite the late hour. "Professor Umbridge, are you sure it wasn't a nightmare?" she asked, skepticism clear in her tone. "It's highly unlikely for a troll to infiltrate Hogwarts without detection." "But I saw it with my own eyes," Umbridge protested, still shaken. Their conversation was interrupted by Professor Snape, who appeared in his nightwear, clearly annoyed at being woken. "What's this about screaming?" he demanded. As more professors, including Flitwick, Sprout, and a sleepy Dumbledore, gathered, Filch relayed Umbridge's claim of a troll in her room. The absurdity of her story led many to suspect she had merely had a nightmare. Despite their attempts to reassure her, Umbridge remained inconsolable, her fear palpable. Professor Snape, his expression sour from being roused from sleep, listened intently. The gathering of professors in the corridor, each in various states of disarray from their abrupt awakening, underscored the unusual nature of the night's events. Amidst the confusion, Dumbledore remained composed, his experience lending him a serene demeanor despite the late hour and the bizarre claim of a troll's presence. Ethan couldn't bear it any longer. He waved his wand, and a bottle of tranquilizer appeared in his hand. He approached Umbridge and said forcefully, "Professor Umbridge, drink this and tell us exactly what happened." Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Umbridge, trembling, took the tranquilizer from Snape and drank it in one gulp. As the drug took effect, her mood stabilized, allowing her to describe the events more clearly. However, even after her explanation, the professors were baffled. How could a troll appear in the castle, let alone in Umbridge's dormitory? Dumbledore decided to investigate Umbridge's dormitory himself. He led a group of professors towards it, confident that if there was a troll, they had the strength to subdue it. However, upon reaching Umbridge's dormitory, they found only a broken door. Professor McGonagall, with a frown, entered first. The dormitory was peaceful, showing no signs of a large creature's rampage. Professor McGonagall's cheeks twitched slyly as she turned to Umbridge and suggested, "Look, there are no traces of the troll here. I suggest you visit Madame Pomfrey for some dreamless sleeping potion. It will help you sleep more comfortably at night." This is impossible. I clearly saw it just now." Umbridge muttered to herself, unable to accept this reality. Professor Snape, while searching the room for clues, noticed some random small objects on the bedside table. He frowned and speculated, maybe there is a boggart hidden in the room. A boggart? Umbridge's eyes widened in anger. Why would there be a boggart here? However, Professor Dumbledore shook his head. There is no trace of a boggart in the room. I think Professor Umbridge may be too tired and not accustomed to the environment here, leading to nightmares. It must be a boggart. It must be, Umbridge insisted. She was desperate to prove that she was not merely having a nightmare. Despite her insistence, the fact remained that after a thorough search by several professors, no boggart was found. Reluctantly, Umbridge had no choice but to visit Madame Pomfrey. The school nurse, a kind witch, after examining Umbridge, comforted her. "You are just too emotional. Drink this cup of dreamless sleeping potion and have a good rest. It's okay." She handed a cup of the potion to Umbridge. After leaving the school nurse's office, Snape broke the silence. "What do you think of this matter?" His gaze swept over the professors. "What do you think? Just stand and watch. No one here appreciates this person sent by the Ministry of Magic to cause trouble at Hogwarts." Did a student deliberately scare Umbridge? Snape pondered various scenarios. Someone secretly placed a boggart in her room, then, when she panicked, took the opportunity to remove it. Professor McGonagall, struggling to conceal her amusement, questioned, "But why would students do this? According to you, this seems like an elaborate prank. So, which student harbors deep hatred for Umbridge?" She knew well that many students disliked Umbridge. Maybe Peeves is up to something, Filch suddenly suggested, always quick to blame the poltergeist. The professors unanimously shook their heads. Everyone knew Peeves couldn't have been responsible. As it turned out, Filch was mistaken. Dumbledore, with a gentle wave of his hand, dismissed the idea. Signaling everyone to quiet down, Dumbledore announced, "Okay, it's late now. Everyone should go back and rest." However, as he turned to leave, Professor Flitwick quickly caught up with him. "Dumbledore, are you really going to let this go? You must have seen what Umbridge has been doing these past 2 days. She's clearly trying to align Hogwarts' teaching methods with the Ministry of Magic's agenda," Professor Flitwick argued, trying to persuade him. "A novice leading an expert will only lead to chaos." "It's not that I want to let it go, but there are some things that I can't change at the moment," Dumbledore sighed softly. "The situation at the Ministry of Magic is far more complicated than you think. Minister Fudge refuses to acknowledge Voldemort's return, creating chaos throughout the wizarding world." "All right," Professor Flitwick conceded, halting his argument. He looked into Dumbledore's weary yet resolute eyes and understood the gravity of the situation. As the headmaster of Hogwarts, Dumbledore faced his own set of challenges. Taking a deep breath, Flitwick said softly, "Well, if that's the case, let's wait and see what unfolds. Regardless, we will stand by you and support your decisions." In his heart, Professor Flitwick knew the situation was peculiar from the start. The first incident with Umbridge's nosebleed could have been dismissed as accidental, but subsequent occurrences suggested deliberate sabotage. Although he could only speculate, it wasn't hard to guess who might be behind it. He had seen young wizards use tricks to skip charms class before. As for Umbridge's claim of seeing a troll, it was plausible that someone had placed a boggart in her room, as Snape had speculated. But was that really important? Not in the slightest. What mattered was their understanding of Umbridge's character. From the moment she had Lupin dismissed, her true nature was unmistakably clear. "I think Professor Umbridge may simply be overworked. Let her rest well," Dumbledore suggested calmly. He was acutely aware of Umbridge's true intentions for coming to Hogwarts and what she planned to do. However, Dumbledore had more pressing matters to attend to, and could no longer afford to be entangled in her schemes. Chapter 533. The weather outside Hogwarts was gradually turning chilly. The early morning mist swirled around the castle, casting a white veil over the ancient magical structure. The young wizards retrieved their thick robes from the depths of their trunks, donning their autumn attire. However, Harry seemed impervious to the cold. He ascended the marble stairs 2 at a time, his pace quickened by a sense of urgency. Ever since Professor Lupin's identity as a werewolf had been exposed, a fire of indignation had been lit in Harry's heart. He couldn't fathom why misfortune seemed to befall the good. Sirius had spent years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Lupin was now ostracized, and the memories of his own parents' fate were like thorns in his heart. Upon reaching the 8th floor platform leading to the divination classroom, the portrait of Sir Cadogan sprang to life. Drawing his sword, Sir Cadogan challenged Harry. "Come back, you running coward! Don't back down! Fight me!" Harry, however, seemed not to hear him, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of injustice and anger. 2, 5, 3, Harry mused, recalling Professor Lupin's kindness and the engaging defense against the dark arts classes he taught. Yet, now that Lupin needed support, few were willing to stand by him. Those who had once benefited from Lupin's guidance now chose silence. Harry couldn't comprehend their inaction, nor could he forgive their betrayal. Harry's gaze then shifted through the bustling crowd, landing on a figure in the distance, Lorith Jane Umbridge, the senior investigator of the Ministry of Magic and deputy principal of Hogwarts. She strutted down the corridor, adorned in the same fluffy pink cardigan and a large black velvet bow, an ensemble that clashed with her authoritative position. To Harry, she resembled a grotesque toad crowned by an unsightly fly. Neville and Flagg encountered Umbridge in the corridor. With a wave of her wand and a lift of her chin, she subjected them to her magic, tightening the top buttons of their shirts and tucking in their shirt hems with precision. The 2 boys watched her leave, feeling utterly humiliated. Umbridge didn't stop there. She targeted a couple on a stone bench, separating them with a flick of her wand. They fell to the ground, too intimidated to express their discontent, well aware of the severe punishments Umbridge could impose. In her short tenure, Umbridge had already subjected the students to numerous sanctions. Harry, among others, had felt the brunt of her authority. Only Ginny Weasley seemed immune to Umbridge's provocations. The auditorium hall's wall was now plastered with notices detailing the new school rules Umbridge had implemented. These included prohibitions on music during study hours, a ban on all Weasley products, and mandates on dress and decorum. Argus Filch, ever eager to enforce these rules, gleefully hammered them into the stone wall. He relished his role as Umbridge's enforcer, even fantasizing about the return of corporal punishment. Punitive measures such as whips and prison cells were suggested as means to deal with disobedient students. When Harry entered the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Umbridge was already seated behind the podium, her face adorned with a disgustingly sweet smile. Harry, with a deliberate show of defiance, hoisted his school bag higher on his back and, without giving Umbridge a glance, strode confidently to the last row. His actions seemed to only fuel Umbridge's interest, her smile widening in response. The students who entered after Harry were silent, their expressions a mix of helplessness and dread at the thought of enduring another tedious lesson under Umbridge's tyrannical teaching. "Good afternoon, classmates," Umbridge greeted in her overly sweet voice once everyone was seated. The response was a few mumbled greetings, clearly not to her satisfaction, prompting her to demand a more enthusiastic reply. "Please, put away your wands and take out your Defense Against the Dark Arts textbooks," Umbridge instructed. To no one's surprise, the students, already familiar with her routine, looked at their textbooks with visible disappointment and resignation. Despite this, Harry couldn't help but feel a perverse sense of satisfaction as he observed the dejected faces of his classmates. "Turn to page 15. We'll try a different approach to learning today," Umbridge announced, her hands clasped in front of her. "Read silently to yourselves. I want absolute silence." The room fell quiet, save for the occasional sound of pages turning, much to Umbridge's delight. Suddenly, a knock on the door disrupted the silence. Umbridge frowned as she saw a weary Professor Lupin at the door, accompanied by several members of the werewolf registration office. "Sorry to interrupt, Professor Umbridge. I've come to collect my belongings," Lupin said, his voice gentle despite the harsh treatment he had received from the woman before him. His gaze swept across the classroom, meeting the eyes of the students, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. To avoid further punishment for Lupin, Dumbledore had negotiated with Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge, agreeing to stringent conditions. Now, Lupin was under the lenient supervision of the Werewolf Registration Office instead of being sent to Azkaban. He had returned to Hogwarts to gather his personal items. "Do you want me to come back after class?" Lupin asked, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "Take it now, Mr. Lupin," Umbridge replied coldly, her use of Mr. a pointed reminder of his dismissal from Hogwarts. Harry, from his seat at the back, glared at Umbridge, incensed by her disrespect towards Lupin. Lupin nodded slightly and made his way to the staff lounge, his steps heavy with the weight of countless memories. Neville, watching Lupin pass by, turned away, his lips pressed tightly together, overwhelmed with sadness and guilt. Ethan felt he had not done enough to support Professor Lupin. As Lupin moved about, the young wizards watched him covertly. The classroom was engulfed in the dead silence mandated by Umbridge. The students sat in their seats, their gazes drifting towards the slightly ajar door. Through it, they saw Professor Lupin wrapping a scarf around himself, each movement laden with weight. Professor Lupin, a known werewolf, had once made his classes vibrant with laughter and hands-on learning. Yet this lively atmosphere was quashed by Professor Umbridge's dull and punitive teaching style, which included point deductions, detentions, and even corporal punishment. Professor Umbridge's voice was deceptively sweet, reminiscent of a perpetual child. However, her teaching methods were anything but gentle. They were strict and inflexible. In her classes, only the top students from the erudite society were permitted to engage in practical activities. The rest were subjected to tedious theoretical lessons and were strictly forbidden from practicing magic outside of class. This approach not only disengaged students, but potentially left them unprepared for practical examinations in the future. Please support this story with your votes, comments, and rewards. Your support is crucial to me as the author. Chapter 5 and 34. At that moment, the door of the staff lounge creaked softly open, and Professor Lupin emerged. He walked through the rows of student seats with a somber expression, his head bowed. Parvati Patil had been silently observing Professor Lupin. As he passed by her, an inexplicable urge welled up inside her. She clenched her fists as if to muster courage, and just as Professor Lupin reached the front door, about to exit, she stood up abruptly and declared in a clear, resolute voice, "Professor Lupin, I believe you would never harm anyone." Professor Lupin halted, turned, and looked at Parvati, his eyes filled with gratitude and relief. In these trying times, the support and trust from his students were invaluable to him. He took a few steps towards Parvati and said, his voice trembling, "Thank you, Patil." However, this tender moment was abruptly shattered by Professor Umbridge. She snapped, "Let's go, Mr. Lupin. You are no longer a professor here." She then turned to Parvati with a stern command. 10 points from Gryffindor, Miss Parvati. Please, sit down immediately." Parvati disregarded Umbridge's command, spun around, and shouted, "Professor Lupin taught the best defense against the dark arts course of any teacher. You know nothing. You only know how to deduct points and impose solitary confinement. I'm going to put you in confinement, Miss Parvati." Umbridge blurted out, her eyes widening. She then realized her words might have played into Parvati's hands, but she dismissed the thought and accused, "Look what you have done. Anyone else who dares to speak out will be confined just like her." Professor Lupin's lips tightened, and he cast a sorrowful glance around the classroom. Harry, observing Parvati's unwavering gaze, felt a surge of respect. He recalled how, during their first year in a flying class, when Malfoy snatched Neville's Remembrall, everyone hesitated except for Parvati, who stood up without a second thought to help Neville retrieve it. Her courage and sense of justice left a lasting impression on Harry. She embodied the true spirit of Gryffindor. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, Harry stood up and bellowed, "Professor Lupin is the best defense against the dark arts teacher." Umbridge, sensing the rising tide of emotion, became anxious. As a seasoned politician, she knew well how contagious emotions could be. Allowing even a few dissenters could disrupt the class and cause her to lose control. She sharply decreed, 10 points from Gryffindor. Mr. Potter, please sit down immediately. Furthermore, from today, you will report to my office for detention at 5 o'clock every afternoon. Professor Lupin, witnessing the scene, felt a deep sense of guilt and helplessness. His students were facing punishment because of him. He stepped forward, then halted, and addressed Umbridge. Professor Umbridge, the fault is mine. Please, don't punish them. I'll leave now and won't interfere with your class. Umbridge, however, was not inclined to let Professor Lupin and his students off so easily. She looked at Lupin, her face devoid of any pretense of a smile, now filled with mockery and disdain. Mr. Lupin, let me remind you that I am the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. I have every right to discipline students who disrupt the class. Now, please leave immediately, and do not make me repeat myself. Ron, seeing Harry trembling with anger, knew his friend was at his breaking point. As a loyal friend, it was his turn to stand by him. With determination, he stood up and proclaimed loudly, Professor Lupin is the best Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. The Dark Arts teacher. We all support him. Ever since Umbridge assumed the role of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, the simmering dissatisfaction and anger among the young wizards had been like a volcano on the verge of eruption. When Umbridge angrily issued a warning, the students could no longer contain their emotions and stood up in unison, showing their support for Professor Lupin through their actions. Hermione also felt the urge to stand, but she held back, considering her role in helping Ethan with the Erudition Society. She knew Umbridge's tolerance for the society was already thin, and she couldn't risk upsetting the delicate balance they had managed to maintain. Neville, witnessing the fervent actions of his peers, felt a fire ignite within him. His cheeks flushed red, and his blood raced, driven by an unstoppable force to stand up as well. Merely shouting, Professor Lupin is the best Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, didn't seem enough to express the whirlwind of emotions he felt. Since the night Professor Lupin was captured, Neville had been tormented by his own cowardice. He regretted not standing up for Professor Lupin, not being brave like Harry. In Neville's eyes, Professor Lupin held an irreplaceable place, second only to Professor Pomona Sprout in his heart. Professor Lupin had always embraced his clumsiness with tolerance, guiding his learning with endless patience. Yet, when Professor Lupin needed support the most, Neville had faltered. Now, seeing Professor Lupin nearby, Neville's protective instincts surged. He remembered his struggles with the Patronus charm, his repeated failures, and how Professor Lupin never lost faith in him, always offering encouragement and support. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, Neville couldn't hold back his emotions any longer. He drew his wand and exclaimed, "Call to God for protection." In that moment, Neville seemed like a volcano erupting with passion and heat. Drawing strength from his pent-up emotions, he transformed them into courage and faith. The spell burst forth from his wand, materializing into a massive silver toad that leaped across the desk towards Professor Lupin. Call to God for protection. Harry, too, drew his wand, and a graceful silver stag emerged, prancing around Professor Lupin. Call to God for protection. Ron followed suit, his wand producing a Patronus in the form of a Jack Russell Terrier that loyally circled Lupin alongside the stag. The actions of these two Gryffindor heroes seemed to unleash a wave of catharsis. Inspired by Harry and Ron, the rest of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class drew their wands, ready to cast the Patronus charm. This charm, a beacon of positive emotions such as happiness and protection, filled the classroom with a radiant energy, dispelling the darkness and lighting up everyone's hearts. Even some Slytherin students, moved by the atmosphere, disregarded house divisions and stood up to honor Professor Lupin with their Patronus charms, a testament to the respect and well-wishes they felt for him. Everyone could successfully cast the complete Patronus charm, just like Neville. At this moment, their wands were emitting more power than ever before, radiating a bright white mist. Professor Lupin, you may not have taught me the Patronus charm yourself, but you are indeed the best Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Hermione, initially hesitant, could no longer restrain her inner impulse upon witnessing the scene before her. Clutching her goblin silver wand, she stood up resolutely. Although she had mastered the technique of casting spells silently, she chose to shout the spell loudly at this moment. Expecto Patronum. A silver cat leaped from the tip of her wand, larger and more dazzling than all the other patronesses. Pansy Parkinson, who had been observing with a detached demeanor, found herself unable to remain passive. She frowned at Hermione's actions, feeling a surge of dissatisfaction. This reckless lioness, it's really troublesome. If I don't follow suit, Ethan Green will definitely be unhappy when he finds out. If Ethan is unhappy, Draco will be angry with me. Pansy quickly exchanged glances with the Slytherin members around her, nodding in silent agreement. They realized the situation had shifted, and Umbridge would never manage to confront the entire class of young wizards at once. Thus, they stood up, waved their wands, and chanted the spell loudly, Expecto Patronum. As the spell was repeatedly cast, more silver animals materialized in the classroom, surrounding Professor Lupin and forming an impenetrable silver barrier. This protective power, like a trickle converging into a majestic river, filled every corner of the classroom with an atmosphere of warmth and hope. The students, their faces alight with determination and enthusiasm, were not merely casting a spell. They were paying the highest respect to Professor Lupin. He stood at the center, bathed in the warm light of the patronesses, overwhelmed with emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he realized these students were expressing their support and love for him in such a profound way. At this moment, the heavy burden of werewolfism he had carried since childhood seemed to lift. The constraints of prejudice appeared to melt away under the light of the patronesses, no longer affecting him. He turned to the two werewolf registration office clerks beside him, who also displayed deep emotion, silently stepping aside and nodding to Lupin, their eyes full of understanding and support. With a choked voice, Lupin thanked them, then took a deep breath and drew his wand. Lupin had always harbored a dislike for his Patronus, as summoning it brought back painful memories. He detested everything associated with wolves, and even avoided casting the Patronus charm, preferring to let Harry Potter demonstrate it instead. He would usually only produce an incorporeal Patronus unless absolutely necessary. However, today, as he chanted the familiar mantra, Expecto Patronum, everything changed. A silver wolf emerged from his wand, not with a ferocious or wild aura, but exuding warmth and tranquility. It led the other Patronuses around the students, and at that moment, Lupin felt no ferocity or wildness from his Patronus, only the warmth of the wolf pack surrounding him. Update 5 Thurs. Additional Update 117. Please support with custom orders, flowers, monthly votes, comments, and rewards. If you have votes, please cast them my way. Certainly. Please provide the text you'd like me to enhance. Chapter 535. Ever since Umbridge assumed her role as the senior investigator and Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, she has been diligently working to cement her authority. Her crowning achievement was the exposure of Lupin, which she used to instigate fear among the students and parents of Hogwarts. This maneuver forced Headmaster Dumbledore into a compromising position. However, Lupin's unexpected return tarnished her victory. His mere presence to collect personal belongings was met with overwhelming support from the students, reminiscent of the deep connections formed between close friends or romantic partners. This unexpected show of solidarity left Umbridge feeling both enraged and humiliated. Umbridge's frustration was compounded by the realization that the law does not punish those with widespread support. Had only a handful of students shown their allegiance to Lupin, she could have easily quashed the dissent through detention or even corporal punishment. But facing the united front of nearly the entire student body left her powerless. In a bid to regain her lost prestige, Umbridge sought to undermine the other professors. Utilizing the extensive powers granted to her by the educational decree, she began a campaign of intrusion and criticism across various classrooms, aiming to assert her dominance. A minority of students welcomed Umbridge's crusade. They had grown weary of the traditional and orthodox teaching methods and were eager to see Umbridge expose and possibly expel some of the faculty. Names like Professor Binns, the unnamed potions teacher, and the fortune-telling Professor Trelawney were among those they hoped to see ousted. For the professors, Umbridge's actions were akin to an unexpected inspection by a high-ranking official from the Ministry of Education, causing a mix of anxiety and unease. The more experienced educators prepared diligently, ensuring their students were well-versed in the curriculum to withstand scrutiny. The less experienced, like Professor Trelawney, faced these developments with panic and dread. Professor Trelawney, known for her mysterious and cryptic demeanor, felt an unprecedented pressure. The security and benefits she had taken for granted seemed to vanish overnight, leaving her to confront the possibility of dismissal. During a divination class on a dreary Friday afternoon, Professor Trelawney, with her dream interpretation guide in hand, attempted to engage her students with 3 methods of dream analysis. However, her monotonous delivery soon had the students struggling to maintain interest. Even Hermione, a student typically passionate about her studies, found herself disenchanted with the lesson. Hermione had privately explored various prophecy spells with Ethan, discovering a natural aptitude for the subject. Yet, she consistently failed to achieve success with Professor Trelawney's techniques, leading her to question the effectiveness of the course and her own abilities. As Hermione pondered these thoughts, Professor Trelawney concluded her lecture and assigned the day's task. Students were instructed to pair up and use the Dream Interpretation Guide to analyze and discuss each other's dreams, marking the beginning of yet another unconventional lesson in divination. Before Professor Trelawney could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by the sudden, harsh sound of the door opening. The students turned their heads to see Professor Umbridge emerging from the trapdoor on the floor, wearing a sweet smile. "Good afternoon, Professor Trelawney," Umbridge said in her distinctively high-pitched voice as she closed the trapdoor. "I believe you received my notification, correct? It clearly states I'm coming to check on the time and date of your class." Professor Trelawney's expression immediately soured, and he nodded stiffly, looking quite displeased. He then continued to explain the specific steps of dream interpretation to the students, deliberately ignoring Umbridge as if she were not there at all. Umbridge, unfazed by Trelawney's cold demeanor, walked to the nearest chair, pulled it aside, and sat down. She surveyed the classroom, pen in hand, occasionally jotting down notes and casting critical glances around. After Trelawney concluded his lengthy explanation and sat down, parched and weary, Umbridge, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke up. "Professor Trelawney, how long have you held this position?" she inquired. "Almost 16 years, Trelawney replied, visibly annoyed. 16 years? Time flies," Umbridge murmured, making a few notes on her clipboard before looking up at Trelawney with a provocative gaze. "With such extensive experience in divination, you must be quite skilled, right?" Trelawney glared at her, crossing his arms and shrugging his shoulders as if offended by the question. "I have served this school faithfully for 16 years. If I lacked genuine talent and knowledge, would Professor Dumbledore have allowed me to remain in this role?" He retorted confidently. "My divination skills are beyond question. Even the headmaster doesn't doubt them. Professor McGonagall has sought my advice on when Gryffindor might win the Quidditch championship, and Professor Flitwick has consulted me about marriage matters." Trelawney's tone suggested he was a central figure among the Hogwarts faculty, revered by all. It was this confidence, perhaps, that had enabled him to maintain his position for so many years without being exposed. Umbridge, taken aback by Trelawney's assertiveness, quickly jotted down a few more notes to mask her surprise. After a moment, she asked, "So, it was Professor Dumbledore who appointed you?" "That's correct," Trelawney replied, his voice tinged with pride. "He personally requested my services on multiple occasions." Umbridge made a few more notes, then slowly raised her head, speaking in her characteristic high-pitched voice. "As I understand, you are the great-great-granddaughter of the famous prophet Cassandra Trelawney, correct?" "Yes," Trelawney responded, puffing up with pride. However, Umbridge pressed on. "But as far as I'm aware, none of Cassandra Trelawney's descendants seem to have inherited her prophetic gift. Do you believe you are the exception?" Feeling momentarily guilty, Trelawney quickly regained his composure and explained, "This kind of talent usually skips a generation. It appears every 3 generations." Observing Trelawney's slightly embarrassed demeanor, Umbridge's smile widened. She snapped her clipboard shut and said in a tone that brooked no argument, "Continue, please. I hope you can know on." In the classroom filled with young wizards, the tension between Professor Trelawney and Umbridge was palpable, rendering the students unable to focus on their books. They gradually set aside their reading, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding confrontation. Professor Trelawney, her eyes ablaze with anger, faced Umbridge defiantly. "I cannot simply conjure a prophecy on demand. The inner eye does not work at one's behest," she declared, her frustration evident. Umbridge, clearly disappointed by Trelawney's response, prepared to leave, shaking her head in disapproval. Yet, as she turned to go, Trelawney's voice halted her in her tracks. "If I were you, I'd leave this school at once." Umbridge turned, surprised by the sudden change in Trelawney's demeanor. Her voice now carried a chilling, ominous tone, and she seemed to be in the throes of a great agony, her body twitching slightly. "I see darkness within you, scars and pain. You are headed for trouble, Umbridge." Trelawney's words sent a shiver down Umbridge's spine. Trelawney's eyes were wide, reflecting a profound sadness, before she let out a piercing scream. "This is a curse! This is a curse!" The sharp cry resonated through the classroom, causing the nearby students to cover their ears. Umbridge, visibly startled, took a few steps back, her face flushing with anger. "Trelawney, were you cursing me just now?" she demanded. Exhausted and pale, Trelawney appeared to have expended a great deal of energy. She was breathing heavily, as if she had endured a significant ordeal. Despite her fear, she looked at Umbridge with conviction. "That was the prophecy. The very prophecy you sought." Umbridge, skeptical, pointed out, "But I've heard from many students that you have a habit of frightening the newcomers at the start of the semester, claiming they will meet a violent end within the year, correct?" Her tone was sharp, her disbelief clear. Unwavering, Professor Trelawney stood her ground. "What I have seen is what I have foretold. I cannot alter it, nor will I lie about it." Frustrated by Trelawney's steadfastness, Umbridge angrily stormed out of the room, her high heels echoing loudly against the floor, leaving a tense silence in her wake. Chapter 536. Harry witnessed everything. He watched Umbridge storm off angrily, then turned his gaze to Professor Trelawney's slender figure, sighing, "Oh my God, this is the first time I've realized Professor Trelawney is incredibly brave." Over the past few days, Umbridge had evaluated 6 professors, and Professor Trelawney had proven to be the most resilient and steadfast among them. Harry's respect for Trelawney grew spontaneously. "That's probably not just bravery," Hermione interjected, her tone serious. "Have you forgotten the prophecies Professor Trelawney made a few years ago? Many of them have come true. It might have been a true prophecy." Although Hermione had previously dismissed Trelawney as a somewhat eccentric character, influenced by Ethan, she had taken a closer look at Trelawney's prophecies. These weren't mere ramblings, but genuine prophecies made in moments of apparent madness, when Trelawney seemed to be possessed by the Heavenly Father. Hermione was astonished to find that these predictions had largely come true. Prompted by Hermione, Harry recalled the accurate predictions made by Professor Trelawney. He wondered if Trelawney had made another prophecy, foreseeing some unknown future. "Wouldn't that be better?" Ron said gleefully. "So Umbridge will be out of luck soon." So far, no defense against the dark arts professor has managed to stay for more than a year, Harry added, feeling grateful for Voldemort's curse for the first time. Professor Trelawney's remarkable defiance in the classroom quickly became the talk of Hogwarts, sparking widespread interest among the students. The almost cursed prophecy she made about Umbridge turned her into a hero in their eyes, and she was hailed as the most knowledgeable teacher at Hogwarts. Before Umbridge's arrival, many students were skeptical of Trelawney, dismissing her as a charlatan. However, Umbridge's oppressive methods and disdain for students quickly made her the most disliked figure among them. Faced with two evils, students began to rally behind Professor Trelawney, choosing to believe in her predictions, whether true or false, and hoping they would come to pass. The students' support for Trelawney wasn't blind. Aware of Umbridge's power as a senior investigator and her ability to dismiss any professor, they were concerned for Trelawney's future, fearing she might be fired. Meanwhile, a rumor circulated that Trelawney was Dumbledore's illegitimate daughter, which seemed to bolster her confidence and made students curious about her background. It was rumored that the divination class was nearly cancelled but was saved by Trelawney's presence. If the rumor was true, Trelawney's connection to Dumbledore could be significant. However, Umbridge remained unfazed by these rumors. Her investigations had shown that Trelawney lacked strong support. The previous harassment of professors was merely a tactic to sow discord. With Trelawney, Umbridge was ready to take decisive action, choosing her as the first target for her perceived vulnerability, aiming to establish her authority. Umbridge believed that if she could successfully oust Trelawney from Hogwarts, the other professors would fall in line under her management. However, her plan was only partially successful before it hit a snag. Trelawney's curse-like prophecy effectively thwarted her efforts. Before fully understanding the situation, Umbridge refrained from taking any rash actions. Her initial strategy was to target the more vulnerable staff members, but she soon set her sights on confronting the most authoritative figure in Hogwarts after Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall. As Dumbledore's right hand, Professor McGonagall maintained order in the school during his absences and held the esteemed position of deputy headmistress. Umbridge knew that discrediting McGonagall could potentially lead to her expulsion, allowing Umbridge to claim the deputy headmistress position for herself. She even fantasized about accumulating enough influence to challenge Dumbledore for the headmaster position, despite the flawed logic in her plan. However, Professor McGonagall was not easily intimidated or provoked. Her decades of experience and impeccable professional skills made it difficult for Umbridge to find a foothold. Umbridge attempted to disrupt McGonagall's class with coughing noises, hoping to draw attention and interrupt the lecture. McGonagall, unfazed, sharply told her to seek medical attention if needed, leaving Umbridge embarrassed and speechless. Umbridge's efforts to gather negative information about McGonagall from the students also backfired. The students spoke highly of McGonagall, praising her excellence and dedication. It was during this inquiry that everyone was reminded of McGonagall's nearly 40 years of service to Hogwarts, a testament to her commitment and the stability she brought to the school. Frustrated by her failure to undermine McGonagall, Umbridge felt a deep resentment. However, she recognized the need for conclusive evidence before taking any action against a fellow deputy headmistress. Both held equal power and position, making it challenging for Umbridge to assert her dominance. Originally, Umbridge had hoped to intimidate the other professors and establish her authority, but her plans were thwarted first by Trelawney and then by McGonagall. As she contemplated her next move, a spy within her network at Hogwarts provided her with new information, reigniting her ambitions. Umbridge had her own intelligence network at Hogwarts, and she was always looking for opportunities to leverage it to her advantage, especially after her attempts to win over the prefects. Umbridge, having been frequently pranked by young wizards, realized the necessity of planting spies among the students to gather intelligence for herself. These spies had two primary objectives: to identify the mastermind behind the pranks on her, allowing her the chance to retaliate, and to monitor potential threats within the student body, such as those opposing the Ministry of Magic or supporting groups like Bolito's organization, which kept an eye on Ethan Green. The recent incident involving Ginny made Umbridge suspicious of Ethan. Despite Ethan's assurances that he was not involved, Umbridge suspected him of plotting to overthrow Fudge's regime in favor of installing Jaina. She believed that finding conclusive evidence of this would earn Fudge's praise and possibly elevate her position within the Ministry of Magic. However, recruiting undercover agents required meticulous planning and consideration, a task at which Umbridge excelled. She knew that to successfully deploy undercover agents, she needed not only to promise them substantial rewards, but also to leverage their vulnerabilities. The threat of betrayal was a significant concern for Umbridge, as employing undercover agents among children could damage her reputation. Umbridge's most common tactic for exploiting vulnerabilities involved using the family members of potential spies as leverage. Knowing that no one would dare betray her if their loved ones were at risk, as Umbridge considered the children of Ministry of Magic employees attending Hogwarts as potential hostages. Although the ultimate authority for appointing or dismissing wizards lay with the Minister of Magic, having parents working within the ministry meant that their children's well-being could be used as a bargaining chip. Despite lacking the authority to dismiss employees herself, and despite Fudge's reluctance to make such decisions without cause, Umbridge used this strategy to intimidate the less worldly young wizards. Not every student had Ethan's early understanding of political machinations, making her tactic effective in recruiting a group of spies. With the addition of some eager young wizards from Slytherin House, she finally established her intelligence network. The ace spy she valued most, Marietta Aikimo, codenamed Pangolin, brought her information about Ethan Green's secret base. This news thrilled Umbridge, as gaining access to Ethan's secret base and uncovering his plans against Minis, Fudge would achieve her goal. Success in this endeavor could further expose Ethan's conspiracy and solidify her status within the Ministry of Magic. Chapter 5 and 37, Umbridge's Trust in Marietta. Umbridge had always placed her trust in the information provided by Marietta, who was codenamed Pangolin. This wasn't the first time the little spy had brought her crucial information that helped her sidestep those troublesome pranks. Marietta's background further solidified Umbridge's trust in her. Her mother was Miss Ackmore from the Flu Network Administration of the Department of Magical Transportation, which fell under Fudge's influence. Given her advantageous background and proven reliability, Umbridge felt she had every reason to trust Marietta. However, Umbridge was always slightly puzzled by the codename Pangolin. She knew it referred to an animal adept at burrowing, native to the East, but the choice of such a name intrigued her. Upon inquiring, Marietta, with a playful blink, responded, "Spies are essentially digging for information daily, aren't they? Plus, I'm currently gathering intelligence right next to Dragonborn Zhang Chu and Ethan Green, making Pangolin quite fitting." Umbridge couldn't help but laugh at this explanation, finding Marietta even more endearing. One day, Marietta came to Umbridge with thrilling news. "Professor, I've discovered Ethan's secret base through my good friend Zhang Chu," she whispered. "The base is actually Slytherin's secret chamber, hidden in an abandoned bathroom." Umbridge's interest was immediately piqued. She was familiar with the Chamber of Secrets and Ethan Green's remarkable feat of bravery in his second year, where he and his friends ventured into the chamber, defeated the basilisk, and saved 2 classmates. It seemed Ethan had claimed the chamber as his secret base after that daring escapade. So, Umbridge mused, Ethan usually comes across as quite arrogant, yet he's always up to something behind the scenes. It appears he's been using the secret chamber to plot some conspiracy. A cold light flashed in her eyes as she smiled. "Yes, Professor," Marietta agreed. "I believe Ethan is concocting some grand scheme in that secret chamber." Umbridge had long been interested in Zhang Chu, considering her potentially more valuable for inciting rebellion than Marietta. Zhang Chu's close relationship with Ethan, her involvement in the Erudite Society, and her position on the Ravenclaw Quidditch team made her an ideal source of information. Umbridge believed that winning Zhang Chu over would be akin to uncovering a treasure trove of intelligence about Ethan. However, Zhang Chu's disdain for Umbridge, referring to her as a pink toad and mocking her as an unmarried old aunt, deeply wounded Umbridge. These barbs struck at Umbridge's insecurities about love and acceptance, revealing her hidden desire for affection and companionship, which she felt was unattainable due to her unpopularity among younger, handsome wizards. "Another one spoiled by Ethan," Umbridge muttered bitterly, vowing to retaliate against Zhang Chu if given the chance. With the valuable information in hand, Professor Umbridge decided to investigate the secret chamber personally. She was not one to delegate such important tasks, preferring to see things through herself. Delegating important tasks to others was crucial for Umbridge, as this operation was key to further consolidating her position within the ancient walls of Hogwarts. She meticulously planned every detail, including the timing. The Halloween Eve banquet presented an excellent opportunity. At that time, the young wizards of the castle would gather in the Great Hall to enjoy the annual feast. Even Ethan, who was usually elusive, would make an appearance to celebrate the festival with everyone. This meant the Chamber of Secrets would likely be unguarded, providing Umbridge with a golden opportunity. As Halloween approached, Professor Umbridge and the students eagerly anticipated the holiday. However, a sense of unease permeated the castle, dampening the usual festive spirit. It was akin to celebrating the new year without receiving the customary red envelopes, a tradition where the joy of giving and receiving was expected despite any pretense of reluctance. This year's Halloween felt lacking, especially with the absence of the familiar scent of roasted pumpkins. Many students voiced their dissatisfaction, wondering how Halloween could feel complete without it. It was then they realized that Hagrid, who annually contributed to the Halloween spirit by growing giant pumpkins, had been conspicuously absent. In previous years, Hagrid's pumpkins, enlarged with an expansion spell, were a staple of the celebration, used in dishes, drinks, and decorations, filling the castle with a festive atmosphere. His absence this year left a noticeable void. Despite mixed feelings about Hagrid's classes, students found themselves missing his presence. He was, after all, a constant figure in Hogwarts, much like the other professors who had become fixtures at the staff table year after year. And with Halloween at Hogwarts, there was an unspoken rule that something unusual was bound to happen. Realizing the diminished holiday spirit, Professor Flitwick took it upon himself to search Hagrid's fields for any wild pumpkins that could salvage the festive atmosphere. Unfortunately, their search was fruitless. In a last-ditch effort, Professor Flitwick transformed a handful of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans into jack-o'-lanterns to decorate the Great Hall. Additionally, the professors arranged for fluttering bats and colorful ball-fish that sprayed water to roam the corridors, attempting to compensate for Hagrid's absence. Despite these efforts, the festive atmosphere was undeniably lacking. As the banquet commenced, Umbridge's absence from the staff table was noted. While her frequent absences due to recent injuries were not unusual, it sparked curiosity among the attendees. Dumbledore, however, appeared unconcerned by her absence, suggesting that perhaps there were more pressing matters at hand, or that her plans were already in motion. He was too indifferent to search for her, and simply declared the Halloween banquet officially underway. As Dumbledore's voice faded, the lights in the Great Hall dimmed, enveloping the space in a mysterious and dark ambiance. The banquet began, featuring a long table laden with an impressive array of delicacies, each emitting a tantalizing scent. The entertainment was particularly captivating, highlighted by a performance from the Weird Sisters, which added a festive spirit to the event. Umbridge's absence seemed to lift a weight off the students' shoulders, allowing them to indulge in the feast with greater ease. Without the stern witch's presence, the entire hall was imbued with a relaxed and comfortable atmosphere. The professors, too, had their own preoccupations. Professor Flitwick, seizing the opportunity, planned to inquire about his marital fate from Trelawney, leveraging the wine as a social lubricant. The buzz around Trelawney's previous divination class, where she claimed Flitwick had sought her counsel on marriage multiple times, had spread like wildfire. Rumors now suggested Flitwick's repeated consultations were due to a fondness for Trelawney, leaving him quite embarrassed. Professor McGonagall, on the other hand, was visibly delighted by Umbridge's absence. She shared a few extra glasses of wine with Professor Sprout, her face alight with a cheerful smile, clearly enjoying the absence of the trouble-seeking witch. Professor Snape was the exception, his mood soured by disappointment. He had concocted a special potion for Umbridge, intending to teach her a lesson during the dinner, only to find she had not attended. Feeling his efforts were wasted, he was filled with frustration. Despite the varied preoccupations, the Halloween party was a joyous occasion for all. The highlight of the evening was the ghostly entertainment. As a mist filled the air, the ghosts of Hogwarts emerged silently from the walls and tables, lining up to perform a spectral dance in the air. They moved with an eerie grace, dancing a waltz to the haunting melody of a musical saw. Nearly headless Nick, showcasing his unique predicament, had his head dangling precariously, eliciting gasps from the students. The performance enveloped the hall in an otherworldly atmosphere, transporting everyone to a realm beyond. After the banquet, the students, led by their prefects, ascended the stairs in an orderly fashion, buzzing with excitement over the ghostly performance and eagerly anticipating the next day's classes. Yet, Some couldn't shake the feeling that this year's Halloween was lacking the usual unexpected events, noting that nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Chapter 538. At that moment, Umbridge found herself embroiled in an unexpected adventure. Acting on information from Marietta, she ventured into the abandoned girls' bathroom on the second floor. With a mix of caution and curiosity, she gently pushed the compartment door open and peeked inside. However, as soon as she stepped in, the door slammed shut behind her, causing her to jump in fright. She frantically pushed against the door, only to realize it was securely locked. A wave of horror washed over her as she discovered her wand was missing from her pocket. Resigned, Umbridge sat on the toilet seat, her mind racing for a way to escape. Trapped without her wand and with the door locked, she realized she couldn't apparate out of the school. Despair briefly took hold before she reminded herself to remain calm. Calm down, don't panic, she whispered to herself, taking deep breaths to steady her emotions. Yet, despite her efforts, panic won out, and she couldn't help but shout for help. Her cries were met with a light, mocking laughter that seemed to float through the air, reminiscent of a bell chiming in the night breeze, shattering the silence of the bathroom. "McGonagall, is that you? Did you kidnap me?" Umbridge looked up sharply, panic flickering in her eyes. She had assumed it was Professor McGonagall, but instead, she found herself face to face with a female ghost, Myrtle. "If I were you, I wouldn't shout like that," Myrtle said in a teasing tone, crossing her legs as she sat atop the wooden door, a sly smile playing on her lips. Her presence only added to the already tense atmosphere. "There are very few students here, and they're all at the Halloween party tonight. Even if you scream, no one will come to save you," Myrtle explained slowly, her words tightening the knot of fear in Umbridge's heart. "Myrtle, please, go find Dumbledore for me," Umbridge pleaded urgently. However, Myrtle remained unmoved, tears welling up in her eyes as she lamented, "Stupid! You actually asked me to find Dumbledore." Her voice grew sharp and harsh. "Knowing that I couldn't, knowing that I haven't eaten for a long, long time." Myrtle pulled out her handkerchief, burying her face in it as she sobbed loudly, her cries echoing through the washroom. Umbridge, growing increasingly irritated, shouted, "Enough! Go find Dumbledore now, or I'll have you removed as well." "You dare yell at me?" Myrtle screamed back, her eyes wide with indignation. She quickly wiped away her tears, a sinister smile creeping onto her face as her tone took on an eerie quality. "You know, you could actually get out through the toilet. The pipes below lead to the Black Lake. I sometimes take walks there, though once someone flushed the toilet when I wasn't expecting it." Pointing at the toilet, her smile grew more unsettling. Umbridge felt a wave of revulsion. The thought of navigating the sewer to the lake was unbearable, especially given her severe mysophobia. She would rather face death than subject herself to such filth. "I don't want to." "Well, you better be careful," Myrtle chuckled, her laughter reverberating off the bathroom walls. "The game begins." With that, Myrtle plunged into the toilet, causing water to splash onto Umbridge's robes. The dampness sent a chill through her. Umbridge quickly stripped off her coat and threw it to the ground, unwilling to even touch it. Myrtle's words made it clear that she needed to find a way to save herself, and quickly, or face dire consequences. Standing on the toilet, Umbridge attempted to use the momentum to leap up and grab the top of the wooden door. However, her strength was insufficient, and her physique made the task impossible. She could only hang from the door, resembling a large toad, as she contemplated her next move. With arms stretched out, Umbridge hung there, engulfed in embarrassment. Suddenly, a strange bubbling sound filled the air, accompanied by a disgusting stench. Unable to resist, Umbridge looked down, only to be met with a sight that filled her with dread. From the toilet, a stream of yellowish-brown liquid began to gush out. Initially, it was no thicker than a thumb, but within seconds, it surged and bubbled as if boiling, becoming more vigorous. With a sharp sound, a huge sticky mass mixed with yellow water erupted like an uncontrollable fountain, violently spewing out of the toilet. The filthy liquid sprayed across the floor and walls, and even splattered on Umbridge, covering her indiscriminately. She stood frozen, as if time had stopped, while the toilet continued to spray intermittently, each burst deepening her despair. Surrounded by feces, the scene took on an absurdly artistic quality. Her face was coated with a thick layer of filth, resembling a homemade facial mask, and her entire body was drenched, the yellowish-brown and bright red mess mixed together, evoking the image of spoiled tomato and egg soup being dumped over her. It was as if she had become a living exhibit of body art. Instinctively, she licked the dirt on her lips, the astringent, bitter taste making her stomach churn. Unable to bear it any longer, Umbridge vomited on the spot. But before she could finish, the ground shook, and a thumping sound came from beneath her feet. She realized it was the sound of a septic tank exploding. The school's drainage system had seemingly lost control, causing the excrement of teachers and students to flow crazily upstream through the twisting pipes. Erupting like volcanic lava, it spewed out of the toilet with unstoppable force. These filthy substances sprayed out densely and rapidly, like a heavy Maxim machine gun firing indiscriminately. With devastating momentum, they mercilessly invaded Umbridge's nose and mouth, leaving her unable to breathe or escape. I must be in hell, Umbridge thought desperately. This unprecedented situation pushed her psychological limits, yet it also brought a strange sense of calm amidst the panic. In her desperation, she began to ponder absurdly, to which level of hell does this belong? Is it the hell of the West or the underworld of the East? She mocked herself, realizing that such a scenario was not mentioned in any legend about hell. She also understood why Myrtle had asked if she could swim before leaving. It was because she needed to struggle to survive in this cesspit, perhaps even needing to swim. In that moment, Umbridge found a sense of calm. Her mind raced, contemplating various ways to survive. This extreme despair and will to live allowed her to see through life and death. In those few minutes, her state of mind underwent decades of change. She even began to view the disaster with detachment, thinking, if some suffering is destined for someone, why can't it be me? Holding the disgusting excrement in her mouth, a strange enlightenment came to her. In this darkest and most desperate moment, her soul touched upon some truth of the world. Her heart was elevated, and she experienced a sense of spiritual sublimation. Relief washed over her, a sensation that transcended physical pain. She felt as though she was standing in a higher realm, gazing down upon the chaos and suffering of the world. However, this feeling of transcendence was short-lived. The sound of the auditorium door opening and the ensuing chaos of hundreds of footsteps broke her reverie. The sound of students ascending the stairs, their laughter penetrating the thick walls, reached her ears. Umbridge realized that human joys and sorrows are vastly different, and to her, the noise was nothing but a disturbance. At that moment, her desire for sublimation vanished. She knew that Myrtle, with Peeves in tow, would attract students to witness her humiliation. The thought of her students seeing her in such a disheveled and embarrassed state was unbearable. What would they think of her, looking like a dog trapped in a manure pit? These thoughts plunged her mood to its lowest depths. She understood that no matter how much her heart sought transcendence, she could not escape the physical and harsh realities of life. It was imperative to find a way out of this predicament, otherwise she would never be able to face her students again. In Umbridge's mind, Myrtle was a ghost who was generally harmless. Therefore, she concluded that there must be another force at play here, not a human, but a ghost. Given the nature of ghosts, born out of obsession, it could only be a ghost orchestrating her current situation. And who else could it be but Peeves, the one always eager to play pranks with his array of bizarre props? Umbridge, in her ignorance, never realized that Peeves was not a true ghost, but a poltergeist, a being of pure mischief. Another possibility began to echo in her chaotic thoughts. Could this trap, this meticulously laid snare, have been orchestrated by Zhang Chu and Marietta? Marietta, has she betrayed the cause? Umbridge whispered to herself, only to immediately dismiss the thought. Please support the story with your likes, monthly subscriptions, reviews, and rewards. Your votes are incredibly important to me as the author. Chapter 539. Contrary to Umbridge's initial suspicions, Marietta did not stray from her original stance. In fact, from the very beginning, she was never solely Umbridge's informant. After all, how could someone with the codename Pangolin pledge allegiance to just one faction? Marietta, a double agent for both the Erudite Society and the Ministry of Magic, adeptly navigated the complex web of alliances. While she outwardly succumbed to Umbridge's demands to incite rebellion, she had already secretly reached out to Zhang Chu, divulging the entire plot. As Ethan's close friend and ally, Zhang Chu immediately relayed the information to him. Marietta's loyalty to Ethan, a prominent member of the Polytechnic and a figure she deeply admired, far outweighed her fear of Umbridge, whom she disdainfully referred to as the Pink Toad. Ethan's formidable strength and Gianna's influential background offered Marietta a strong sense of security. Ethan even assured her that Offa Associates would secure her mother a job should Fudge decide to terminate her employment. To gain Umbridge's trust, Ethan collaborated with the twins to orchestrate a series of pranks. They intentionally leaked this mischief to Marietta, providing her with the chance to prove her loyalty and competence to Umbridge. Her efforts quickly earned her Umbridge's favor and trust. The decision to launch their attack from this specific location was strategic. The Chamber of Secrets was not only real, but also deeply connected to Ethan's past. The most effective deception is a truth that omits certain facts. This tactic not only easily secured Umbridge's trust, but also allowed Marietta to justify her actions later. On the second floor of Hogwarts, the silence of the corridor was abruptly shattered by a low noise. Soon after, the sound of chaotic footsteps mingled with the laughter of students, full from tea and snacks, filled the air. The young wizards, bubbling with excitement, crowded into the hallway from both ends. However, their advance halted as they were met with expressions of confusion and horror. A pungent odor, so overpowering it was nearly suffocating, had begun to permeate the entire floor. "What is that smell? What's happening?" a student inquired, covering his nose and grimacing. "It's horrendous, absolutely unbearable," another exclaimed, waving his wand in a futile attempt to clear the air. "It's so unpleasant," a young witch complained, her nose buried in her handkerchief. At that moment, Zhang Chu, feigning ignorance, called out, "Who's eating snail noodles?" Ethan glanced at Zhang Chu, a smirk hidden in his heart. "You know exactly what's happening, yet you still ask," he thought. Zhang Chu's question immediately piqued the student's curiosity. "Snail noodles? Who's eating that?" one student asked, scratching his head. "It sounds intriguing, but is it really that good?" another pondered aloud, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Zhang Chu, amused by the student's curiosity, responded, "Snail noodles are a traditional delicacy from the Eastern continent. They have a unique aroma and an even more unforgettable taste." She added mysteriously, "If you're interested, I could try making some for you to try next time." Her words sparked an immediate wave of enthusiasm among the students, all eager to sample this exotic dish. Ethan stood to the side, observing the scene with amusement. Observing the group of young wizards discussing food with enthusiasm in a foul-smelling environment left Ethan speechless. He found it hard to connect the repulsive odor with anything remotely edible. However, he couldn't entirely fault Zhang Chu for her choice to make black snail noodles. She knew Ethan's preference for Dragon Country cuisine and often sought out recipes to please his palate. Once, Zhang Chu stumbled upon a snail noodle recipe and excitedly began to cook. When she emerged from the kitchen with the bowl, emitting a potent fragrance, she discovered that the Genius Club members, previously dining in the living room, had vanished. Halfway through their meal, even the flower demons in the garden fled, leaving the tower deserted as if Death Eaters had passed through. Adding insult to injury, the Dryad Queen, Vera Nestri, approached, asking if the tower's toilet had exploded due to the unbearable stench. Zhang Chu's frustration peaked when Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, mistook the snail noodles for a litter box, burying its waste in the bowl. The look of disgust in Crookshanks' eyes, as if Zhang Chu and Ethan were consuming feces, was unforgettable. Though the incident caused no physical harm, the misunderstanding and insult were deeply offensive to Zhang Chu. From then on, she vehemently criticized anyone who dared to insult their choice of cuisine. As the foul odor persisted, a student finally exclaimed, "It's like a septic tank exploded." Another agreed, noting the familiarity of the smell. Myrtle led Filch and his cat, Mrs. Norris, to investigate. Norris sneezed repeatedly from the stench, prompting Filch to cover his nose and demand the culprit in the bathroom to surrender and release the hostage, Professor Umbridge. Malfoy, followed by Goyle and Crabbe, pushed through the crowd, declaring his authority as prefect and threatening point deductions. However, the stench overwhelmed him, prompting Myrtle to tease that a treasure awaited behind the door. Intrigued by the possibility of the Chamber of Secrets being involved, Malfoy ordered Goyle to kick the door open. Despite their efforts, the door remained firmly shut, leading Malfoy to command a combined effort to break it down. Goyle and Crabbe exchanged glances before simultaneously charging toward the wooden door. Their repeated impacts made the door tremble, but it stubbornly refused to yield. The sound of their efforts echoed down the empty corridor, mingling with the exclamations of students and Filch's curses. Malfoy watched with a mix of anticipation and fear, eager to discover the door's secret, yet apprehensive about the potential dangers it concealed. After numerous attempts, the door finally gave way under the relentless assault, collapsing with a thunderous crash. Instantly, a torrent of sewage burst forth like a freed beast, flooding the corridor. Malfoy's eyes widened in horror as he instinctively tried to flee, but the forceful rush of water knocked him off his feet. He struggled against the current, feeling as though he was being dragged into a vast whirlpool from which escape was impossible. Sewage filled his mouth and nose, making it difficult for him to breathe. Desperately, he flailed his arms and cried out, "I can't swim! Save me! Hurry up! Toory up, Toonie 7." However, the overwhelming stench drove the students away, leaving Malfoy alone in his struggle. At that moment, Ethan stepped forward. With a swift wave of his wand, he conjured a solid force field wall, halting the spread of sewage. The water level began to recede as the bathroom's sewer outlet started to drain the flood. Malfoy, soaked and humiliated, managed to stand, coughing out the foul water. Realizing he was the focus of everyone's attention, he hung his head in shame, wishing he could disappear. Meanwhile, Professor Umbridge emerged from the water, swimming with surprising grace in a standard breaststroke. She alternated between freestyle and dog paddle with such elegance that, were Hogwarts to host a staff swimming championship, she could easily rival Dumbledore. As she noticed the water level dropping, Umbridge looked up to find herself surrounded by hundreds of young wizards, their expressions a mix of shock, fear, admiration, and even envy. She spotted Colin Creevey of Gryffindor taking photos, internally cursing his insensitivity. Despite her irritation, Umbridge realized this was not the time for reprimands. With a quick tilt of her head, she feigned fainting, choosing this escape over facing the embarrassment of the situation. After all, Umbridge was too concerned with her dignity to openly acknowledge such a humiliating predicament. Chapter 540. Just as Umbridge was about to feign fainting, Gabrielle's voice, laced with mock concern, pierced through the crowd. "Oh dear, Professor Umbridge seems to have choked on water. Someone should assist her. Perhaps artificial respiration is required, lest she be in peril." Her words prompted the students to retreat even faster. The idea of administering artificial respiration to Umbridge was beyond their tolerance. The thought alone of such intimate contact, coupled with the unsavory odor emanating from her, sent shivers down their spines. Undeterred, Gabrielle turned her attention to Malfoy, appealing to his sense of duty with a hint of sarcasm. "Malfoy, as a prefect, shouldn't you be demonstrating our Slytherin pride? Please, assist Professor Umbridge with artificial respiration." Malfoy, however, was visibly repulsed. Having ingested a bit of the contaminated water himself, the thought of Umbridge, who had been submerged in it for minutes, made his stomach churn. Pansy Parkinson, standing behind him, turned a shade of green. Having recently reconciled with Malfoy and daydreaming about their potential romantic moments, this scene made her question her feelings. Despite her affection for Malfoy, the thought of engaging in any form of intimacy under these circumstances was daunting. The arrival of Principal Dumbledore, flanked by a cadre of teachers, brought a gust of wind through the corridor. The sight of Umbridge's pitiable state prompted everyone to glance at Professor McGonagall, given the recent tensions between her and Umbridge. Yet, among the students, suspicion also fell on Professor Trelawney, who had recently been coerced by Umbridge into making a dark, almost cursed prophecy that had now seemingly come to fruition. Could she truly possess such powers? A young wizard mused aloud, his words echoing among the students. Professor Trelawney, often dismissed as a charlatan, suddenly seemed to command a new respect. The revelation that she might genuinely possess hidden talents sparked curiosity among the students, eager to learn from her. Dumbledore, maintaining a distance from Umbridge, simply waved his wand. The sewage vanished, leaving the corridor spotless, though the lingering odor served as a stark reminder of the incident. Peeves, the poltergeist, floated nearby, his presence marked by a mischievous grin as he sang a taunting rhyme about Umbridge's ordeal. Approaching Umbridge, Dumbledore inquired with genuine concern, "How are you, Dolores? Can you tell us who is responsible for this?" Faced with Dumbledore's direct question, Umbridge had no choice but to abandon her act. She slowly lifted her head, her gaze filled with malice towards Peeves, and accused him through clenched teeth. Peeves, caught off guard by the accusation, wore an expression of utter disbelief and injustice. Despite his reputation for mischief, he had been blameless during the Halloween festivities, yet found himself unjustly accused. Umbridge was later found resting in the infirmary, isolated in a single room with a small balcony, not as a privilege but due to the unbearable stench that clung to her, humorously referred to by the students as snail noodles. It is commonly believed that when a person's body odor becomes unbearable, they should avoid public spaces. Madame Pomfrey, the ever-smiling and friendly school nurse, was of the opinion that Umbridge needed not medicine, but a thorough bath. Consequently, Umbridge was invited to recuperate in a secluded attic of the hospital wing. Annoyed by this arrangement, Umbridge, after enduring what she described as a cesspool experience, refrained from voicing her complaints. Instead, she wrote to the Minister of Magic, Fudge, requesting Auror protection. Fudge, pleased with the request, promptly assigned 2 old-fashioned Aurors as her bodyguards. Stationed at her door, they were often startled by Umbridge's shrill cries of being targeted for harm. The alleged assailant was Peeves, the mischievous poltergeist. Peeves, however, insisted he had merely intended to clarify had he was not attacking her. Despite his reputation for pranks, Peeves argued he was principled in his mischief. "I only had 1 bowl of noodles, so I paid for 1 bowl of noodles," Peeves declared, performing aerial somersaults. "If you claim there was no attack, then there wasn't one. Accusing me of consuming 2 bowls and blaming me is simply unfair." His protest, echoing through the corridors, amused many, but also alienated other ghosts due to the distasteful nature of his prank. Bloody Baron even threatened him on several occasions. Peeves felt deeply wronged, comparing his plight to that of Dewey, an ancient practitioner wrongfully accused. "Believe me or not, I might as well end it all to prove my innocence," he exclaimed, though his dramatic declaration was largely ignored. Peeves, known for his pranks, found his words held little weight, and his access to the kitchen was now restricted, with the house elves deeming him a nuisance. Peeves' grievances did little to garner sympathy. Instead, they fueled further suspicion. Rumors spread that Umbridge had been assaulted by Peeves, casting a shadow over him. Students whispered and pointed, treating him as guilty. Myrtle, however, reveled in the attention, sharing the story with eager listeners, including Ron. Ron sought her out, eager to hear her recount the events, and left each time laughing and sharing his amusement with Harry. However, the situation took a turn when rumors implicated Ron as Peeves' accomplice, suggesting his keen interest indicated collusion. Ron was devastated, feeling unjustly accused and deeply wronged, especially considering the true culprits were elsewhere, stirring trouble to divert suspicion from Marietta. Amidst this turmoil, Filch's unexpected talent came to light. Known for his stern demeanor and frequent reprimands, Filch was seen donning a thick mask, a peculiar hat, and vibrant overalls with suspenders, skillfully repairing water pipes in the bathroom. This surprising display of competence revealed a different side to the usually gruff caretaker. Observing Filch's diligent figure, one couldn't help but marvel. Indeed, everyone who serves at Hogwarts possesses unique talents. It's uncertain when he will find his Princess Peach. However, the mention of Princess Peach inevitably brings thoughts of Umbridge to mind. Considering Princess Brigitte's penchant for pink dresses, perhaps Umbridge is his Princess Brigitte? From a certain perspective, Umbridge could be seen as an intriguing mix, akin to the offspring of Bowser and Princess Peach. This scenario resembles the tale of an uncle, an adversary, and the daughter of his first love unfolding at Hogwarts. Moreover, Upon Umbridge's arrival at Hogwarts, Filch was the first to react to her presence, indicating a complex relationship between them. Consequently, rumors of a love-hate dynamic between Umbridge and Filch quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. Regarding Umbridge's hospitalization, Professor Snape was undoubtedly the most delighted. He relished the chance to temporarily assume the role of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor once more. Snape devised a clever strategy. He would remain the acting teacher for the duration of Umbridge's hospital stay. This arrangement allowed him to continue teaching his beloved subject while sidestepping the curse associated with the official title of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Secretly, he wished for Umbridge's hospital stay to extend, allowing him to savor the role of acting teacher for as long as possible. If Umbridge were aware of Snape's thoughts, she might very well rise from her sickbed in indignation and dismiss him on the spot.